Right, good morning everybody and welcome. Sorry about the couple of minutes delay, but one of the new things that we've introduced very successfully at the last meeting, which was held at George's, was little video clips of the feedback from the board visits, which are then made available to staff, and they went down really well. It was a suggestion that came from a member of staff who observed board a few meetings back. So my apologies, but I thought it was important that we got as many of the videos completed as we could. And we're now going to start, it's not a full board meeting, it's an informal part, but nevertheless, there is formal feedback from each group who visited different parts of the hospital. And we're going to start with Jacqueline's group, but I don't know who's doing the feedback. Somebody will tell me.
I think my other ladies did between them. I think it was Aruna, Jenny and...
I've just done the vox box,
and Aruna was going
so
to
it's
do
Aruna who's going to do the feedback.
Okay, it was very much a ladies' visit, wasn't it? Yes. Women power, so I'm very much in favour of all of that. So, Aruna, where have you gone? You were. Where is Aruna now?
Was here. Yeah. Here she comes.
She can't
get in. I know there's not a lot of Aruna, but there's...
You need to press the button.
Thank you, Nicole.
Right, you're on already.
Aruna, I'm so funny. It's so funny, Aruna. I did this big introduction of you, and then I went, "Where's Aruna? Where's Aruna?" You're going to feedback on the Swelliok visit.
So I am giving you the feedback, am I?
Well, you
said.
Apparently so. Is that okay?
It's absolutely fine.
Off you go. Thank you.
So, Swelliok, I mean, beautiful estates compared to the rest of...
Can you use your microphones, please, because we're recording it?
So probably it is our outstanding facility, really, in Epsom St Helier, and as you walk through it, really happy patients, really energized staff. We had people come and talk to us and tell us how proud they were because they work there. Patients telling us how happy they were with their service. They have a new facility where they turn patients around on the same day, even with hip and knee replacements. So I think all in all, in a nutshell, a very positive environment and a very positive feel and vibe. Is that fair?
Yeah. I suppose the bit with Swelliok is it is like a factory. I mean, they look after the patients individually, but if they measure everything and everything that whenever they can find, and it's something that isn't adding value, to the patients, then they will actually seek to try and change that. So that's why when they do knee replacements, it's now just a day. It's a day case now. So that's leading stuff.
Yeah.
I think my only reflection was getting in was quite interesting.
Yes. Yes.
And eventually I said, listen, I am the chief executive. I am going to walk up there and we are going to go and have a chat with people because they wouldn't let me in.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think that's, Jacqueline, that's fair. I think the first thing is, could we have something in Swelliok that sort of brands us as a part of the STH? I think it's fair to say if they don't know who Jacqueline is, that is...
Well, the receptionist didn't.
Yeah. But I mean, having something there that says this is the trust board actually would probably be useful. But also, I mean, I did touch upon the SIs and trying to understand if there was, from a staff perspective, any reason as to why they were so close. And the feeling was that it was coincidence. It was two different surgeons, and also feeling that actually that kind of procedure and protocol or pathway is not one that they usually do, and they did it to alleviate the burden on the trust. And now that's gone back to the trust, and they are back to doing their normal hips and knees and that kind of surgery. So I thought it was good to get the staff insight as to what that, why they thought we had two successive SIs.
Well, I'm glad that you spoke to them about the Never events because I think one of the challenges that we always need to be aware of as board members is that we feed back the good and the not so good. And there's always this question of learning and acceptance. So I'm really pleased, Aruna, that you were able to have that conversation, and really interesting that the point was made that they were unusual, they weren't their normal procedures, and that must be something that we should reflect on, I think.
Can I just ask Anne to speak about the Steris thing, because I think that is a thing that we do need to address.
Anne?
So it was interesting having chaired the Estates Assurance Committee, where we've been talking about the outsourced sterilisation contract. And I think certainly when we last addressed it as that group, there was a feeling that it was improving. But that's not the experience on the ground. And they were talking about regularly opening instrument packs where, like, there was a piece of bone on one of the instruments. I think yesterday they came and they all had holes in the packaging, so they all had to go back. So it did feel that wasn't it wasn't where it needed to be, and probably needs some, I don't know where Andrew is, but some more attention, because it wasn't good.
So, have you made a note of that, Andrew? Is it you? So make sure that is followed up. Thank you. Anything further to add? Okay. Well, good to hear all the goods, but a couple of important learning points there, I think.
Yeah, and particularly for us to sort out for them.
Yes,
as well.
yes, yeah. But also I think that point about them feeling part of the hospital and the reflection and learning from Never Events. So thank you. So the next on my list is Andrew Asprey, James Marsh, Phil and Chris. Did that happen? And who is feeding back?
Gillian?
Chris,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, we're
It's
doing a
such-
double act. I'm doing part of the feedback, and Phil, with his expertise, is doing another part of the
Okay,
feedback.
off you.
So we visited Gloucester Ward and Coronary Care. We ran out of time and didn't go to ITU. On both wards, we were welcomed in a very pleasant way by senior staff who were very pleased that somebody had come to visit them, which is, I think happens every time you go on one of these visits. People were glad to be noticed and acknowledged. As well as talking to senior staff, I talked to a ward clerk on coronary care and physio team on Gloucester Ward, which is a respiratory ward. Both wards I thought were tidy. Gloucester Ward, however, was cluttered, and the clutter is largely caused by the equipment that they have, which didn't exist when the ward was built and designed, but has to have a place to put it. But though it was cluttered, it was tidy. The key points that they wanted to make to me were around staff shortages. On coronary care is mainly around nurses. On Gloucester Ward, it was largely around therapists. And there's a big difference between the two wards, because coronary care ward has a much younger age profile, much more independent, though ill patients, whereas Gloucester Ward was a much older age group who needed a much more multidisciplinary team input. And the feedback I got on that was that the MDT worked very effectively with really good input from all members of staff. There were staff shortages, as I said, for nurses and therapists. I think that was the main points I wanted to make. So, Phil.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Gillian. So they, as Chris said, so both very clean. I think, and there was particularly in the CCU, where there is a particular cleaner who works there and is part of the team, and it's good to see that there are cleaners who are part of the team and actively taking, and so that was, I think, very impressive. Both the wards are quite tight. They are built to older standards, so you can see that the beds are relatively close together. The issue of the day is heat, definitely, and they were warming up the wards, and there was a call for, temporary AC, which at the moment isn't there for various reasons, which they will probably take up with Arlene around infection control and whether, and also where Andrew is, whether it's going to trip power and things. But there was a call for trying to do something temporarily about heat, and obviously windows are open at the moment, which again there's an infection control issue and potentially dust issues and things. So there's all that stuff which needs to be worked on. A couple of other things, just on the staffing, again in CCU, there were 2 nurses down today, and one of the comments made was that the trouble is with the bank, some bank staff don't want to do bank shifts if they don't get paid at their grade, and I don't know whether that is an issue or not, but that was coming through strongly, that I think more people would take up bank shifts if the grade was, they were paid at the grade they're actually at, rather than what they're asked to do as work. So that came through strongly, and also on CCU, the patients wait for angiograms, I think they're called, and they tend to either be done, they can sometimes be done here, but they tend to then be outsourced to George's, and various other hospitals I can't remember the names of, but people can be waiting for up to a week, having gone into the ward, to actually have their angiogram done, which is, I think, difficult for the nursing staff because these people are waiting and wanting to know when they get them, and they can't give them an answer, but also it's difficult for the patient because they're just waiting there, not knowing really how long they're going to be there for. So there is something about sort of pathways and things which potentially could be improved, but it was said that the waits were probably shorter now than they had been in the past.
Thank you, Phil. So some clear points there. The pay of grade is an ongoing issue and difficult, I think, to resolve given the financial realities of the NHS at the moment. And we must constantly seek to communicate that to staff. And I think it's really hard. We had a discussion on the community ward that we visited, and I did make the point that there are some things that are absolute priorities, they're safety issues, and it's not a question of money, they will be dealt with, and there are other things that we would love to put right if we could, but money isn't always available, and I think we must never miss that opportunity. The angiogram point, I'm sure you heard it, James, I'm sure that people do what they can, but can we leave that one with you? Were there any points from either Andrew or James Marsh?
Just one small point I'd just like to raise. On Gloucester Ward, there's an incredibly strong sense of team cohesion, and the ward are very proud of getting voted year on year by the junior doctors as being the ward environment where they feel they receive the most support, and there's a bank of certificates as you walk into the ward. And I'm sure there's some learning for other wards in terms of how do they create that sense of team and how do they support trainees or the whole gambit of the multidisciplinary team. I was speaking to a new doctor who qualified, and this is her first job, and she certainly reinforced the sense that she felt safe, she felt part of a complete team, and she enjoyed working on that ward.
That's very good to know. Thank you, James. Although we heard on the community ward that that's the best ward for juniors, so that suggests there's a lot of good places in ESTH to be a junior doctor. Right, so next on my list is James Blythe, Martin and Stephen Collier. Is that right? Did you all go off together?
We did go off together and we returned together happily. So if my two colleagues don't mind, shall I jump in and then you add comments? What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out a couple of the staffing issues that we identified, so probably give you a bit more feedback on those. So 2 units visited, Ebbenham, which is a paediatric day case, and felt really good walking into the unit, both us and the way they managed their paediatric patients and parents who were coming in. Highly experienced, long-serving, committed staff, from the ward clerk right through to the nurse in charge, very strong patient handling, and some very difficult and complex patients up there. This isn't routine peds, lumps and bumps. This is far more complex, and there was one case in particular, a 17-year-old, without saying too much about it, detained patient with an eating disorder, which had clearly been a massive challenge to the unit, and I think they'd handled that, and certainly all accounts were incredibly well and thoughtfully. Dealing with a detained patient in an acute hospital is difficult at the best of times. I think for 17-year-old makes it far more complex, particularly with the particular eating disorder. Tidy, well organised, but boy, it was hot. 31 degrees at reception. Lovely to see reception as you walk into the ward. 31 degrees at reception this morning. No floor standing AC at that end of the ward, but there was at the other. So the plan was to open the windows once the doctor's huddle had finished and see if we can get some air in. There are a couple of key points on staffing there. Firstly, the rigidity in the way in which we set the establishment. We rightly leave a 20% margin on top to cover CPD, sickness absence, maternity leave, but that doesn't trickle down to individual units, particularly small units with only 5 staff in the establishment. It's quite interesting to hear the dialogue between James and the staff about what they could do about it, but long story short, one of the 5 had gone on maternity leave, they couldn't get cover, so it was putting tremendous pressure on the others, and they were responding incredibly well to it. There'd been no loss of goodwill, but if that's writ large across the rest of the trust, it is a big challenge. James acknowledged that, and I think you're going to have a look at that. The other thing on staffing that stood out here is a highly experienced nurse who is desperate to go on a prescribing course, which will be good for the trust, good for her and our retention of staff, and somehow it just seems not to have got off the ground. Playing to people's strengths and their capacity, I think, is critical, and it looked like something that could be easily fixed. But we came away impressed. We then went to Casey, which is the inpatient paediatric unit, largely medical caseload and oncological. Very clean, very friendly, experienced, very well organised, and very enthusiastic staff. They clearly knew their stuff, and the unit looked and felt very engaging for younger users. Massively let down by the bathrooms, I've been asked to say. And we looked at one, and it was massively let down by the bathrooms. We couldn't quite understand how you got £30,000 worth of work to change a bath and do a little bit of cosmetic work. More fundamentally, it's a unit that's set for 12 patients at the moment, but the complement is up to 16, and there's quite good evidence of a flexible approach to staffing, so running at 12 over the summer, flexing up as required, or when the management can see peaks beginning to come in. Staffing levels generally good, some tightness around HCA and RMN cover, RMN critical cover, when we've got detained patients in there, and that is a real pinch point. And 2 staffing issues I'd like to pull out from there. Firstly, the HCAs are being taken away from their HCA patient support, staff support role to serve food and wash up, which didn't seem to be a particularly good use of that resource. And the question we obviously asked is, why is that? Why have you been told that has to happen? And the answer was, because it's always been that way on Casey. And the more, I think, important point was the bank. They use bank staff well. We also heard about the point that Phil made, that we're paying to roll, we're not paying to the staff member that comes to cover the role. We collectively thought that was the right approach. That does mean that you get down working by Band 7 and Band 6 staff, and we heard somewhere else that the consequence is the Band 7 staff won't do the Band 7 work, they'll only do the Band 5 work if they're being paid at Band 5. But honestly, we thought that was more bravado. That wasn't the experience on Casey. The nurse in charge said people just do what needs to be done, which was encouraging. We think that's the right decision for the trust, hard though it has been to implement, and all credit to Arlene for holding the line on implementing what's obviously been quite a difficult movement for some staff, particularly the 6s and 7s, to accept. The one thing that stood out as a problem for a future day is we haven't adjusted our bank rates to reflect the substantive award that the NHS Pay Award that was agreed recently. So the band 5 rates are still at 22, 23 level. James, that's correct?
So we have set the bank rates, obviously, with reference to the pay rates that we previously had. I'm looking at Lizzie because I don't think we've flowed the uplift in yet.
So we haven't uplifted the rates since we did in January.
Yeah.
However, we're doing a wider review across South West London in terms of comparing our rates and actually what the rate we're paying is now compared to the hourly rate, because some of them are still competitive as they are because we paid above the hourly rate in 22-23. So it's work that's ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, encouraging to hear it. I mean, it was just a piece of feedback that it felt a bit penny pinching and people felt a bit abused because their substantive work, and most of them do substantive work in the trust, they'd seen a rate increase through the pay award. It hadn't come through in the bank, and I think they just felt they were being put upon as a consequence. So
I think
it's
these
live
things
feedback.
are really, really hard for staff. They don't have the overall responsibility about balancing the books. They're focused on patient care, and I completely understand how it feels to them. I'm glad, Lizzie, you mentioned the South West London piece of work, because I think bank rates have to be seen in that context, because we know that staff move around. Also, a lot of our own staff provide our own bank staff, and that's a situation that we like. So, Martin, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just I'll keep it brief. Just a couple of things. One positive, first of all, and then one not so positive. I thought it was really interesting to see a practical example of what we often talk about our flexibility in working, and particularly there's been a lot of stuff about people retiring and coming back, and actually one of the people we met, her colleagues described it as she was always saving them, because incredibly experienced, retired a few years ago, but every time needed, she comes back. So I think that's a classic of you can have all the formal systems and the HR type processes, but actually if you've got that relationship with somebody like that, that can make all the difference, and hopefully we can do more of that. I saw a common thread in that there's one thing that we've talked about, sort of unpopular decisions, like not being allowed to fill a maternity cover or the bank issue. But I ask the question always, and what reason have you been given? And it may or may not be accurate, but the perception is that from their managers, they hadn't been really given a reason, or certainly not the accurate reason. So for instance, to not be able to replace somebody on maternity leave was because you can't replace people on maternity leave, which is actually quite different from what we understand to be the reality. And on the bank, I saw there was one specific problem, which personally I had a lot of empathy with, that understand why it works this way, but then if I am a band 6 and I can do certain things, I'm not professionally going to say, oh, sorry, I'm not doing those today, because actually I'm on my bank today, I'm only being paid as a 5. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So the consequence is, but I understand the reasons, that you are actually creating a situation where people perceive it to be unfair, and they said, well, we'll just go and work for other trusts. Now, apparently that doesn't happen in practice, but, there clearly was that move. But as I say, it perhaps there's work to be done in terms of managers giving more open and honest and fuller answers as to why certain things can't happen at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think we recognise all those problems, and certainly I never miss an opportunity to explain to staff the financial reality. And we have to enable managers at all levels to feel confident to do that. It's difficult. I mean, we find it difficult, don't we? So imagine how challenging it is for very junior members of staff. So the next group on my list is Arlene and Derek, and despite the fact we started early, we are beginning to get tight on time, so I would ask people to be as brief as they can. So is it Derek feeding back?
It's me, yes. Hi. Thank you, yes. No, we went to maternity and delivery, just a team of 2, and we were made to feel very welcome. We had some very good conversations. It was all very clean, and the fire exits were clear, etc., etc. The context is that there was a CQC visit earlier, actually last week, and I think people felt that they'd had a fair assessment, a very thorough assessment. I think some of the issues that are going to come up, well, there are going to be some issues that are going to come up from that, but I don't think we had the formal report yet. A couple of things we were aware of that were commented on, I think, was the triage area in maternity is very small. You can only get 2 people in there at a time. And the bereavement room is right in the maternity area, so if you've lost a baby, you can hear the other babies crying, and that's perhaps not ideal. So estates things come up again. You know, it's a small footprint. It felt quite tight, but it felt they made the most of the space. The other thing that came up in terms of the sort of footprint was the theatre area is right on the ward, and it's not really as separated as it should be for a theatre area. And I very nearly walked straight into theatres without realising I was walking into a theatre, and that's a work in progress. So those things are being addressed. We spoke to Sophie on maternity, who seemed very positive. Nice team atmosphere as far as you could tell from the vibes. Spoke to Mary, who's the matron on maternity unit, and felt she had a very strong grip on things. Spoke to a patient who'd had a very good experience. We asked her what she could change. She'd had an emergency caesarean, and I suppose the thing she'd change is that she wished she could have had an elective caesarean rather than an emergency one, but I suppose she wouldn't have known she needed an emergency one if she didn't need it. But apart from that, she felt very well supported. She felt things had been explained to her, what was happening, so very good feedback from that patient. One of the things that came up was the benefits from having a physio specifically for women's health post-delivery, but I understand that's not available to all women in the trust. I think that's a Surrey Downs provision, so I'm not sure there was an issue about whether there's equity of access to that, but it clearly was of benefit. Although I think a lot of the value of that was, again, it was in the person, a very skilled person, very experienced, who was obviously clearly very helpful for mothers post-op and post-caesarean, post-delivery, I should say, not post-op. In terms of sort of gripes, Mary was spending quite a lot of time trying to sort out the payment system for the private rooms because the card reader wouldn't read, and and you felt, you know, this is a senior clinician who's spending her headspace trying to work out how to get, you know, IT say you can't connect it to the network, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work, so they can't charge the patients, they have to send them invoices later, and you just feel that a senior clinician shouldn't be spending their headspace doing that kind of stuff. I'm not sure whose job it is, but it's mainly IT, I think, was the problem. But and it's also finance, because they can't get the income for the private rooms because they have to send invoices later. So just felt there's some issues there. And we talked about staffing, and one of the suggestions they made was that the midwives have to be scrub nurses in theatre, which is really a nursing role, not a midwifery role, and there might be some flexibility around staffing to have nurses that do that when someone needs a caesarean. So I think looking at the establishment in terms of flexible staffing rather than the current sort of establishment approach might be worth revisiting. But overall, very positive visit, nice atmosphere, good vibes. We met some very cute babies. So that made the day for me.
Cute babies are always nice.
Carter is 2 days old and doing well.
Lovely. That's very good to hear. Thank you, Derek. Arlene?
That's the patient story for today, the story of Carter. Emergency caesarean, but he's doing well.
Excellent. Quickly, Arlene?
No, nothing much. Just to say the issue around the scrub nurses is one that has been identified prior to CQC visit, and the Director of Midwifery has started the work to swap that over so that we can release midwives. So just to say that.
Thank you, Arlene. So a penultimate group. So we might be all right if everybody keeps to time. It was my own. It was Yin and Lizzie, and I think Yin, you're going to do it, but Lizzie might add a little bit.
Yes. So Gillian, Lizzie and I visited the community ward at Langley Wing. I think you're going to be quickly feeding back on the general impressions, and then I'm going to come in about sort of key observations.
Thanks, Ian. I mean, when I saw my name down for this visit, I was actually really excited because, you know, it's a new ward that's opened and a lot of financial investment gone into this, so I was really excited to go and have a look around. I guess when we first went in the doors, it's a bit disorientating. The signage isn't great. You feel like you're not quite sure where you're going. But as soon as you get up into the lift and out into the reception area, the staff exceptionally friendly, a great welcome from reception, and handed over to the matron immediately, who took us around a great visit, and obviously very proud of the new space. It's great to look around a ward that, the paint all looks nice, it smells clean, it smells new. So yeah, it was a really great visit. A few things were identified, but I think Jens is going to pick up on those.
Thank you, Lizzie. So one of the key things is that the fire doors isn't working still, so I'm looking at Andrew, who asked me to feed that back. Clearly that's some source of frustration, and yes, they are. And then there were some difficulties around the drugs cupboard as well. I'm happy to say it's all been fixed now, but it wasn't lockable for a little while, so that was tricky. And then the third observation from members of staff that we spoke to was about the computers. They wanted to have computers in the right place because the north and south wing are quite far apart, and it's quite difficult to go from one end to the other end. We did speak to Lotzi, who's the international nurse as well, who was there, and she said that she felt well supported. There were no complaints whatsoever, and she was able to find accommodation really quickly. One other observation that we noticed was that the wards themselves were quite mixed. So you have people who are at the end of life care stage, and the people who were able to go home within the sort of next few days. So that was quite interesting to sort of observe. But we had Marlene, who was the consultant, and Kathy, who was the matron who took us round. And overall, we thought that was a really helpful and insightful visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian and Lizzie. The thing I would add is that they do fantastic work there. I think we all know that. And it's a mix, really, of acute and community. So it's a misnomer, I think, to call it community. But I still don't think we're able to prove in a kind of hard economic sense just the value of that ward, James. And Marlene told us she'd been invited to a meeting with Richard Meddings, the chair of the NHS. I think on the back of his visit, that Thurza and I did this visit. So Marlene's been invited, and I encouraged her to say, and she doesn't need a lot of encouragement, those of you who know Marlene, I encouraged her to talk to him about the benefit of getting a proper piece of analysis about just how much benefit for patients and cost reduction comes through that model. That seems to me a really important piece of work, and he has been here and seen it. Marlene and I had a very robust conversation with him at the time, so I've asked her to take that forward. James?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd really welcome that. I mean, I've been involved with Epsom Health and Care for coming up to a decade now, and I think that the fact that the demographic around Epsom Hospital has changed so significantly. We've got over 22% of the population around this hospital is over 65 now, and yet we've managed to cope within our bed base. We've continued to kind of develop the models of care. We do more and more support at home. I think that the fact that we've managed to cope with that change in demographics is a very good indication, but we're sort of almost proving the absence of a problem, which is that we've had to expand further. So, and we are looking to try and use some of the bed base that, of course, that Surrey Downs Health and Care have moved out of within the new hospital, and we have got some national funding to do that. So I think that evaluation would be extremely important. I know that when we looked at the early evaluation of Epsom Health and Care in its first couple of years, we actually thought that it had outperformed the National Vanguard schemes as they were at that point in terms of the measurable benefits. So I think if there's a way that we can continue to demonstrate that, I think I would certainly be very supportive. I know Thurza will have a view.
Thurza, I was just going to come to you.
I was going to say, I wonder whether it'd be helpful for the board in one of the committees to see the evaluation that we do on a regular basis, because I think we have a lot of that information. It just probably doesn't filter up into the board system.
Well, I think that would be helpful, Thurza, because my anxiety is that we're pressed, on our overall costs. But this model actually reduces length of stay. It prevents admissions. So it has an absolute positive benefit on our bottom line. It's fantastic for patients, as you know. You don't need me to say that. And it really is we want to spend more on that in order to do all the things we want to do. And that's hard within our envelope. So I just thought, we've got to find a way of making that case more strongly. So if we've already got some of the information that we could bring together, that would be helpful. And with Claire in her new job, hopefully we'll have a ready route. But I thought Marlin starting off with Richard Meddings might be a good place to start. Right. I'd better be quiet myself, otherwise I'm doing what I want others not to do. And the last on my list is Stephen, Kate, Tim and Peter. So who's feeding back? Tim?
It's me.
Can you keep to time after I've just used up a lot?
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Yeah. So actually, Kate and Peter and I visited two wards, Swift, and I'll try to be so if I can, and Buckley wards, and they were two wards of contrasts really. So we went to Swift first. We were met by Juliet, the ward manager, and Jomar, the matron, and it was a really spacious and tidy environment, I thought, in there. I did get a sense, we knew that it was the lull before the storm. We were there when they were expecting their sort of daily patient intake. It's a surgical elective ward, 22 beds, 3 6-bedded bays, and the rest inside 4 side wards. A lot of the patients that come in there just come in for a day. But they also do bowel operations, which can be 7 to 10 day stay, and gynae procedures 2 or 3 days stay on top of that. They also, 6 of their beds actually also are sort of overspill for medical, and we asked them about how they were staffed, and they said, well, they actually staffed those medical beds sort of separately, really. They sort of kept the teams separate for that. They are fully staffed. In fact, it was amusing to hear that they said that colloquially they're often referred to as Swift Bank, so they do get staff pinched from time to time to fill holes elsewhere. But they said the staff are very happy, and they don't really have any problems with staff retention. Everybody wants to come back, even if they do get pinched from there. One little stat they were really thrilled about, really, was that they said that on the friends and family test, they've had 140 responses and they got 99% positive. So they were, it was really good to hear that. We asked them about things that they needed, and they weren't huge needs, but they said they could really do with more OBS machines. They have 5, but they really need 5 to be working all of the time, and 1 or 2 of them from time to time do not. When that happens, they have to borrow stuff from the equipment library, so things like ECG machines. I was surprised. I would have thought they would have had an ECG machine, but they actually have to borrow one from the equipment library. And just a final piece on them is that we talked a little bit about IT, particularly about EPR, and I thought it was really interesting to hear that they are starting their introductory training for Cerner next week, and planning to go live with the system in April. Now, I'm not quite sure what happens between now and then, but it was quite good to hear that there was a really quite sort of managed program, if you like, of induction into that. So hopefully, when we get to April, that go live for them is actually going to go quite well. Moving on, Buckley ward. Now, we thought actually for a moment we might not get into Buckley because they'd had a COVID outbreak recently, but it's under control and managed. We hope, yes. No, we think so. So managed to a side room. But Buckley, gosh, what a contrast. It's the largest ward at Epsom, 33 beds. It's a medical ward, mixed specialty. And we met Amberley, who's the matron there, who joined us from Guy's and St Thomas's as a renal matron, I think, there, and seemed to be doing just a super job. I mean, we spent all of our time talking to her, actually, sort of about some of the challenges that she's facing. She made the point that all the beds are full. All the beds are always full. Typical length of stay, about a month, but they have had patients in there for up to 164 days. And one of the biggest problems there is that they have nowhere to go. Half of the patients, she said, that they have in there at the moment are medically fit, but they have nowhere to go to. So, that is a huge challenge, I think, both for her and her team, and obviously for the hospital as well. They do, of course, because of the diversity of the medical specialties that they cover, they have relationships with quite a number of consultants. And actually, she said that works really well. It's sort of quite manageable, and she said that isn't particularly a problem. And we did talk briefly, I don't know if Kate wants to say anything more about it, but about transfers from St George's, which she said some of those transfers had been problematic over time, with patients being admitted that hadn't been screened thoroughly, and introducing infection or whatever in the ward. That has happened a couple of times. Staffing is a real challenge. She has been successful in reducing the use of agency staff in the 12 months that she's been there, but nevertheless, it's interesting that at band 5 and 4 they have quite a challenge, which I understand is not really an area where you normally expect to have a difficulty in recruitment. But the establishment at grade 4 is 6 and they only have 1. And the establishment at grade 5 is, they have 3 vacancies in that area as well. So that is something that needs to be paid attention to. Also, staff sickness has been a real problem in Buckley, and it appeared from the conversation we had with Amberley that she's been working really hard to manage that down, and it seemed to be a matter of process. She's introduced a very diligent sort of system of following up on absences and understanding what the reasons are, and making sure that is brought under control, and that was really good to hear. 2 more points. Estates. Really the problem with estates is lack of storage. It did, I have to say, when we walked through there, it just felt a bit cluttered after the contrast of Swift. There's not so much space in Buckley, and she said we really need storage for things like hoists and so on, and also for controlled drugs. That has been a problem. I think it's been resolved now, but storage for that has been a problem too. And final point, which was interesting, is she said there has been a plan, perhaps in quotes, to looking at splitting Buckley into 2 20-bedded wards, so between Buckley and Alex, which is in the floor below. And she said certainly that would make the environment much easier to manage if it could actually be split into 2 separate teams, but she said she wasn't sure where that plan had got to.
Thank you very much indeed. Very thorough, so I'm not encouraging anybody else because we're out of time. But I think it would be useful. I don't know who, probably you, James, if the board could just have a note circulated about that, the potential split of Buckley, because as we know, it's a very, very big ward, isn't it? I don't think we need to discuss it now. But I think the trouble is that these things are raised and then board members kind of think, whatever happened about that? Is that okay?
Yeah, and it's subject to a business case process with the ICB at the moment. So perhaps when we conclude that, it might be helpful to let people know where it lands.
That would be really helpful. Thank you, James. Okay, so I'm going to slip seamlessly 1 minute late into the formal board meeting. So welcome everybody. Welcome to members of the public and welcome to Georgia's governors. We have some apologies for absence. Andrew Murray's daughter is being married today, so I think that's probably a good reason for him not to be here. Andrew Grimshaw and Paul de Gama are on holiday, so Andrew's represented by Lizzie and Paul de Gama by Nicole, so welcome to both of those people. I think that's all in. I've not missed any apologies, have I? No. Any declarations of interest that I'm not aware of? No? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting, a couple of small details. Derek pointed out that we'd not got him right on the visit list, and there was just a bit of precision about where was visited, so we've made that correction. And Anne pointed out that she presented the report on estates assurance, not the 2 Andrews. So we've made those corrections. With those 2 corrections, are people happy to agree the minutes? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. If we could turn to the action log. Sorry, I need to take my specs off so I can see this. So the first item is about the problems with mental health. And were you going to say something, Jacqueline?
Well, the action was for me to talk to the local commander because they were quite difficult in ED between the police bringing in mental health patients and our emergency care staff in ED. And I have spoken to the local commander who did a full investigation, which I have shared with Kate and the team. And I think we've learned something from that too, which we have implemented.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the next item is not yet due. And the final one is an update on how HR policies are dealt with. Stephen?
Not on the substance of the update of HR policies, but it says it's completed on the action log. It's not completed, it's coming to the People Committee for oversight in September.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's completed as a board action, but it's live for the People Committee.
Yeah, and I think that's the right place for it to be. And I should have said under the mental health item that a quality committee are spending a lot of time looking at this, took a very detailed report at last meeting, and I know we'll be keeping it under close scrutiny. So I think that both of those actions, the first and the third, are being actively progressed by board subcommittees, which is right, I think. And the middle one is not yet due. So I think if everyone's happy with that, we can note that and then move on to the Chief Executive's report. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There's quite a lot in here. Most of it's happened in the last couple of weeks. So rather than going through that, I'd much rather just take questions. I do just want to say, because we never talk about this bit, just to acknowledge the group-wide awards where we've got members of staff across our whole group who have been nominated for national awards. And just to say, we're very proud of them. Happy to take questions on the rest of the
Thank
reports.
you, Jacqueline. Right. That's probably taken everybody by surprise, but certainly the best way of handling it. I've seen Phil first of all. I'm sure there'll be others, and then Jenny.
Also, can you please, Jacqueline, tell us a bit more about preparations for the upcoming industrial action? Obviously, it's you know a serious situation now where we're going to potentially have sort of two strikes happening at the same time, and whether there's any special arrangements that you need to put in place.
I'm going to ask both Kate and James to say more because they are mired in the detail of this. But it is a worry to us having both lots of doctors, both the doctors in training and a consultants off at the same time. So we have been giving it more focus than we have with previous industrial action where we got into quite a good battle rhythm. But maybe if I ask Kate first, if that's all right with you,
yes, absolutely.
Chairman, and James, because they're able to give a better reflection.
Yeah, happy to, and a good question, thank you. So we are in full planning mode. I think the consultant and the junior doctor combined strike, interestingly, in some ways presents less issues for us because it's very straightforward about what activity we can do, which is pretty well none. So it's pretty devastating for our elective work. It's another hit. It will be Christmas Day services only, and we plan everything in accordance with that, and we know that the rotas will be set at that as well. So, and actually the last consultant strike, you know, it's always a bit of a mix about how many people go on strike, but there will be definitely Christmas Day cover, and we will arrange services accordingly. The junior doctors strike, I mean, as you know, this is, I don't know, maybe the fourth or fifth time we've had a junior doctor strike now over the last few months, and we're much clearer now about what our capacity can be, what we're able to deliver, and how we work with our consultant staff and juniors, etc., around planning that effectively. But I think probably the overall, and it will come up in the IQPR, the overall concern is we're losing activity every time there's a strike, and it's creating that sort of greater backlog when we were making really good progress. So I feel confident that the arrangements are good and are in place. I think the other thing just to mention is just the whole well-being of staff around strike action. And it's obviously wearing for the people taking strike action, and it creates a level of tension, not necessarily directed at the trust, but frustration that people have about this just going on and on with no obvious endpoint. So, and it has a massive impact on our administrative staff, etc., who are constantly cancelling and rebooking patients. So that's another area that takes a big hit in terms of these strikes. But I feel like we've got good structures and organisational approaches to it, and we know what we're going to be doing.
Thank you, Kate. James?
Yeah, not much to add. I mean, I think the key to it is really planning bottom up and doing it at specialty and service and divisional level. So, the conversation starts with, what do we need to do to make each ward, each service safe in terms of providing, the cover, particularly for inpatients in emergency care. And then with what we know about what staffing is going to be available to us, is there anything further we can do beyond that? And that it differs very much by area, and I don't think we quite will know just yet what the cumulative impact of the two strikes will be beyond. Obviously we know that our doctors will work with us to make sure that we do have that safe baseline. But I would agree with Kate. I think it will mean that pretty much everything that is beyond that sort of basic provision of emergency care will very likely be stood down.
Thank you, James. Jenny?
Thanks. When I read your report, Jacqueline, there's a huge business as usual, but there's also, as we've heard, the strikes, the let be, and a terrible things that have happened, but enormous scrutiny and extra pressure on managers and the senior team. And we need to look after and recognise, as well as appropriate scrutiny, there also needs to be support. So I wonder if you could make some comment about this, because there's a short-term adrenaline, but the actions are going to continue for many months, and I'd like to know what's going to be done to help them get through that.
Thank you, Jenny. I think that's a really important question. Jacqueline?
So I think it is difficult, I think generally for the health service at the minute, and I suppose one of my reflections is that I've had huge more patients in my inbox raising concerns about, and it's not just Letby actually, one of the other things was the child that died of sepsis in southeast London, at King's, yes. People now coming up and saying, actually, I didn't feel like I was listened to, and then raising a concern as well. So, excuse me, it does feel that all ways round there is huge scrutiny, and if we're feeling it in my office and with the exec, then I'm sure our staff on the front line and our management colleagues will also be feeling that. And particularly as we're trying to address concerns more in the moment than going through long, laborious complaint processes too. But I mean, we've always had on both of our sites pretty good staff support services, so we keep appointing staff to that place as well. And just being out and about, and I've certainly tried to get out and about a lot more recently, just to check in on staff and to talk. I often wander around our management corridors, as we all do, checking in on our managers as well, just to make sure how they are. There was something else that just popped into my head then, and I've forgotten what that was. But I think there is that, and I think your support of the board and the NEDs is also really critical for that, because as long as we can keep as an executive team our calm and our cool and our stability, then that will also help the rest of the organisation. And that's why your role in this is also important to us.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's why I was so pleased that Jenny asked the question. I'm very conscious of that, Jacqueline. You and I have talked about it a lot, and my inbox is equally full of people, expressing their unhappiness and their concern, and that they hadn't been listened to, and so on and so forth. And certainly many of the ones that are in my inbox at the moment are cases that I know about. And I think this imposes enormous strain on all of you. And I say this often in board, it's really important that executives do feel supported by the board. We do have a job to challenge you as well, and I hope we try and do that fairly, but we should never forget that our job is twofold, and it's really important that you feel supported by us on these things. That doesn't mean that we don't sometimes have to ask hard questions, but I know you ask those of yourselves. So I'm glad, Jenny, that you asked that question and we were able to have that discussion. So the next person I've seen is Chris and then Yin.
Thank you very much. On your report, you mentioned the patient safety implementation thing, which is being rolled out by NHS England this month. Could you just say something about what the implications for us as a board and as trusts are, please?
I'm going to ask Arlene to talk more about this because she is the absolute expert. Well, we're all trying to get our head around the difference between how we've been reporting serious incidents to more of a move towards what have we learned, I think is, and I think that's the right thing to ask. But we do know, I suppose my own reflection is we do know it's always hard to, when you go around and ask staff, as we did, as Aruna pointed out when we were up in Swelliot, about never events and what did you learn, for them to actually know precisely all those details. But my view is I'm hoping that we're able to switch from a root cause analysis and focusing on that to more of the learning. But Arlene, is that all right if I sorry, is it all right if I ask Arlene?
Yes, of course. And you know, Arlene, that my big worry is how the board gets assurance. And I still have not completed that in my head.
No.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian and Jacqueline. So, yes, we are moving to the patient safety incident response framework, which means that we won't see as many SIs. It doesn't mean that we will not see get an opportunity to see where things go wrong, but instead of the focus on individual root cause analyses, which is what we do now, we go down a rabbit hole of one single incident, we will be able to take a step back and look at them as a set of incidents and to pull the themes out rather than individuals. But there will be individual cases where learning still applies. That will still happen because we will still do the rapid review kind of process. And indeed, for things like the CQC visit that we just had, we're going to do an after-action review, which is one of the methodologies that is used in PSEF. In terms of what the board will see, I think it's difficult, and so we're going to, in October, we will have our first report because we have launched PISA for both organizations. We've done a soft launch, as it is called, and therefore we'll be able to then bring at the October board some of the after-action review stuff that we would have done for that. It is different, but this process enables much more of a look at a wider theme as opposed to down individuals. And I think that there's a very heavy emphasis on psychological safety and everyone being involved, included, participating in a way that means that we're not blaming anybody. We don't do that now anyway, but this process very much focuses on that.
Thank you, Arlene. I think we all understand the rationale and would support it, but I still have this anxiety about board assurance, and I suspect that's where Chris was coming from. Yin.
So this is a follow-up question from Jenny's question. I think in your report you mentioned that the NHS England has written to all the trusts asking for particular systems and mechanisms to be put in place, and you were going to provide us with an update in due course. But I was particularly interested about how to support staff who have cultural barriers to speaking up, and I didn't know whether at this stage you had any particular observations about how that might be followed through, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. Jacqueline?
I'm just trying to work that one through, and the question was, so one of the other things that we've also done that I've meant to mention before, or beginning to do, is that the public are also represented in our staff and how they feel, and they still have some great moral injury over the last few years. But we've also seen quite an increase in staff taking out grievances against other staff. So one of the things that we are moving towards now is where we won't let people take out a grievance before they go through mediation, because that actually causes huge amount of stress in departments, and going through a grievance does not help resolve that issue. It just says who's right and who's wrong, or maybe neither of them are right or wrong. So that actually will be a big improvement on how actually our staff will feel, and trying to get good working harmoniously. In regards to how do we ensure that staff who come from other areas and countries we work that through. I'll ask Stephen to talk more about that because he looks after freedom to speak up, if that's all right, Stephen. But I've forgotten what's going on. So my brain's gone to mush. It's been a busy week. I'll let Stephen talk and then my brain might connect itself again.
I think it's fair to say, just to give Stephen a few seconds to think about that this is something that needs thinking about. It's not something that we can just simply say, yes, no, here's something we thought about earlier. These are kind of complex issues, I think, and one of my anxieties is the amount of things coming down on us at the moment, alongside all those things that we talked about, that Jenny highlighted, is it makes for an enormously demanding context, I think. Stephen, has that given you some thinking time?
It's given me some. I mean, yeah, I think you're right. It is a complex area, and I think there are various aspects to it. I think, both trusts have in place freedom to speak up, teams, arrangements, processes that are reasonably well established, and not to say there's not more we can do to strengthen those, but those are working reasonably well. I think in terms of the assurance piece, there is absolutely more we need to do, and we are doing, in terms of having oversight of concerns coming through, both through freedom to speak up and concerns raised outside the freedom to speak up process, so we get a rounded view of them. More we need to do in terms of triangulating those concerns with broader areas. And I think there are things we're taking forward as a management team to improve that. There's more we need to do in terms of how the board and its committees get assurance around the concerns being raised. But there is that broader cultural piece where things like the work streams on psychological safety that are being progressed, the work around culture, all of that comes together. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, and it's how we bring that together and how we then bring the assurance up through the board that is the complex thing to unlock, but critical that we get right.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's work in progress, and I think probably as a board we're conscious there is quite a lot still to do. Richard.
I just wanted to make the point with Ian's question about how do we encourage people to speak up when they may come from a cultural background where that doesn't come so easily to them, that we should encourage local departmental initiatives in this regard. And Arlene and Jacqueline and I have individually been to the so-called Jedi events that have been set up in surgery in St George's, which are very much directed towards improving culture from a D&I point of view. And I've been in the room when there were a lot of people at lower bandings who were not white, who were very quiet in the room when some quite serious things were being discussed. And then when we used the Mentimeter app to project people's comments directly from their mobile phones onto a screen in an anonymized way, the large screen in the lecture theatre filled up with very open and frank comments from people who didn't want to be seen to speak up, but certainly had views and very important views. It's just one example of a local initiative, and I think part of our job is to encourage that to happen across the group.
It is indeed, Richard, and that initiative that's been taken in that particular area is so helpful, but and demonstrates, I think, the quality of the leadership in that part of George's. But you've just highlighted that even there, people felt inhibited in being able to say what they really felt. So a lot of complex work to be done, and we will return to that as a board. But for now, I can't see any other hands. And I'm conscious we've got a lot on the agenda, so we're asked to note that report, and if people are happy to do that, I'm going to move on to item 2.1 and the maternity services report. Arlene.
Thank you, Gillian. So this is the the monthly report, but I think I'll start off with the CQC visits that we've had. So CQC visited St George's Maternity Unit 22nd to 3rd of March and days after, where we had interviews. And on the back of that visit, there is significant concerns around several areas in our maternity, which included our triage area, some estates issues, staffing, and issued a Section 29A notice, is enforcement action. And we had a time frame by which we were expected to deliver the actions to improve the issues identified. All of those actions have been completed, bar one, which we have carried forward into the work that we are doing, and I will talk about that a little bit more. And that work is around the establishment review. So that is looking at, have we got enough staff for what we need, where we need them, and the time that we need them. And that work is a detailed bit of work that we are continuing with. It is expected to finish by the end of September. So that's what I'm aiming to do, because I'm working that through with the Director of Midwifery and the site chief nurse. So that is ongoing. Apart from that, all of the immediate actions were addressed, and we were able to respond to CQC in the time frame given. The final report was then published at the end of August, or in middle of August, and we are now dealing with the issues highlighted as we have 15 must-dos from that final report. Some of them were already in the Section 29A, or issues that we identified needed to be addressed, and we are working the others through. In the work that we started around that, we have identified internal actions, or actions that the CQC didn't identify that we needed to address, but we have, and we are working that through. And the plan is that work, because I have led quite a bit of it until now, with the site leadership team having an operational aspect, the site leadership team will take over that work going forward, so that we can continue to address, not just address issues, but actually make improvements as well. So that is the St. George's visit. For Epsom and St. Helier, the maternity inspection happened the end of August last week, and yesterday we got our high-level feedback. We've had high-level feedback on the days of the visits, and we had verbal high-level feedback again yesterday, and the report is awaited. So that is on the CQC visit in particular. In the report, which is what we're reporting monthly, we have changed the format of the report so that we can get a little bit more focus, I think, on information, on data, and quite happy to have feedback on if there's anything that anyone feels that we can include or remove, anything that's not helpful. The second item that I would like to speak about is the EMBRACE, which is the review of maternal deaths, neonatal and intrapartum deaths, and that data, which is analysed annually. And in 2020-2021, George's was highlighted as an outlier, in that the outcomes were in the category of 5% worse than their peers. And this board commissioned a review of that data, because all of the cases are reviewed by the internal team, and they were indeed reviewed with the LMNS. But this board felt that we needed to have an external look, if you like, and that is happening now, and the report for that is expected at the end of October. In the 2021-2022 data, and this data is always like a year later, George's are now within the same category as their peers, having maintained the same position, as it were. In the position of the peers have deteriorated. So, but it is how it's measured, and it means that George's is now within the acceptable limits for their peers. In both of those reports, Epsom and St. Helier was within or below the average for their peers. So there are no concerns. The other item would be around staffing, and we heard quite a bit about staffing today, just generally, but in maternity staffing, I think for us has been one of the issues that we have focused on in different ways over different times. I have updated the format of the report so that we report the fill rate, which is a tolerance of 94% for both sites. For Epsom, that has been 95%, St. Helier 91%, and St. George's only 90%. bearing in mind, as I said, staffing for maternity services is one of the issues that has been highlighted at George's. There is quite a lot of work that has been happening around getting to those fill rates in the first place, and that includes actions such as having to close the birth centre sometimes, but that happens on both sides, as in both in Epsom St Helier and in St George's, and that work we continue. We monitor that every week. So I monitor it weekly. It's reported here monthly by the directors of midwifery. One of the other important actions is again about ensuring a supervisory midwife for every shift. For in nursing it's called a supervisory position. In midwifery is called a supernumerary, which gives the impression that that person isn't really doing anything, but it's far from that. And the supervisory midwife, it needs to be a band 7 who maintains a helicopter view of all of the activity on the birth centre and the delivery suite and triage. And so for the month of June, which this report represents, that has been 100% at Epsom, 100% at St Helier, and 98% at St George's. And that will continue to be monitored. And then the other issue, and which was an issue raised by the St George's visit, was around staffing for triage. And triage, if you like, is your ED of maternity, and for St George's, that fill rate has been 93% for June, and Epsom St Helier will start reporting in the next report. In order to monitor safety or identify any urgent or emergent issues, the units are required to record red flags. One of the issues that we discovered, one of the issues that was discovered in the work that we were doing was that there wasn't a consistent way for red flags to be recorded. Red flags are nationally agreed incidents where care isn't able to be delivered for whatever reason, and that is included in the report. Includes instances where pain medication can't be administered due to shortage of staff or acuity, and that is all in the report. And the rest of the report really outlines where we are against the clinical CNST, Clinical Negligence Incentive Scheme. Both Epsom and St Helier and St George's declared non-compliance for year 4, and that report came here to board. And for the year 5 was launched, and we have started collecting data. The risks for the trust, for the group, are around transitional care, and that is transitional care is where we have a baby that needs to have additional care because they need antibiotics or IV fluids or some kind of intervention that the other babies wouldn't need. We are not able to deliver that in a way according to the standards, the BAPEM standards, because of the staffing, mostly the staffing and training. And both St George's and Epsom St Helier have started work to look at what is needed. For St George's, we declared non-compliance and we were awarded some funding from CNST towards that, but we haven't had the same for Epsom St Helier. And Epsom and St Helier are working, the Director of Midwifery and Director of Pediatrics are working together to look at how we get neonatal staff trained to be able to deliver that care for Epsom and St Helier. The other midwifery staffing I've already talked about. Saving Baby Cares, Babies' Care Lives bundle is one of the elements of CNST that we are currently amber on, and that is because of training again, and there is a failure of EuroKing. So St George's uses EuroKing, which is the electronic system for recording maternity care. Epsom St Helier uses Badgernet. There is an issue with EuroKing. It is an IT system, and there have been concerns highlighted. So for all trusts that are using it, which means that what we need to find is a way of mitigating the issues, and the teams are working that through, while Euroking, it's a known issue and is being dealt with at a national level. And the final thing that I'd like to highlight is around the MDT training, which looks very red for maternity. There's a specific requirement that there is training delivered as a multidisciplinary team. That means not just midwives or obstetricians, but everybody together. And the struggle is getting everybody together on the same day at the same time. There are improvement action plans in the pack that highlight the work that is happening to address that. And I'm happy to take questions on the rest.
Thank you very much indeed, Arlene. There's clearly an enormous amount here, and I think it's helpful if we think about it in three bits. There is the whole CNST situation, and in relation to both trusts, Quality Committee and Board have been, I think, unhappy and not assured about the fact that we haven't been where we need to be, and a lot of effort going on into that. So that's kind of one chunk. There is the big chunk about the CQC inspections and the report, particularly that we've had for George's, which I think is a report that gives us all a great deal of concern, and we have to acknowledge that as a board and express our extreme regret and unhappiness about that. And this report gives us a lot of information about how we're immediately dealing with let's call them the must-do and should-dos. And then there's the subsection of the CQC, which is what's just happened at ESTH, and it's too early to know what the results are there. But I think it's probably fair to say the experience felt a bit different to George's. Is that fair, Arlene? Probably difficult to say anything more than that. And then I think the third element, which is for the future, really, for the board, and I mean the immediate future, I don't mean some way off, is some of the broader pieces of work that we will have to do, and we will do as a group, because it's absolutely fair to say that ESTH has learned a lot from the George's inspection. And that's exactly what the kind of situation we would want to see. But this third chunk that I would describe is some of the broader leadership and cultural work I think we will have to do. And we will come back to that as a board, as I say, in the immediate future, but it's not something that we can easily talk about in detail now. So I think if we think of it in those three chunks, then that might be a helpful way of structuring the discussion. But Anne, I've seen you immediately.
Thank you. I'm not sure my question quite fits that, but I will try. So clearly, I think we're all very disappointed about where we find ourselves in maternity, and it feels a very uncomfortable place to be where we are now, because there's lots of activity kind of in progress but kind of not happened. And that's not to say, I know, Arlene, that you're doing a lot of activity to try and drive this forward. But I'm in that kind of place where, so for example, if I pick up the CNST, where we talked about transitional care and saving babies' bundles, I read this report and I say there's a risk we'll be non-compliant. I don't know what that means for the safety of mothers, babies that come into our units today. And that's the bit that I feel quite uncomfortable about. I'm getting lots of information about what's happening, but not what it means. Are we safe?
I'm going to take a few questions. Otherwise, I think there's a danger that we'll spend the rest of the morning talking about this. But I think that's a really good question, and it kind of straddles probably all three of my categories. Jenny.
Again, I can see a huge amount of work is going on in this area. I echo, as a board member and also a member of the Quality Committee, I still question myself as to how I was relatively unsighted about this, and how the reports that have subsequently come out have shown shortcomings when I thought it was an area that we had been getting more positive feedback about. And we can't change where we are, but what I want to do is try and make sure that, say, in 3, 5, 10 years, this doesn't happen again, that bigger, higher level concern. And I take my own share of responsibility in that.
Thank you, Jenny. I think we all bear a responsibility for this. That's the important thing. We're a unitary board, and we do have to ask ourselves those questions. Right. I want to take a few questions. Peter and then Chris.
Thank you. And just looking at the detailed action plan, which is good to see, it's very comprehensive, quite a lot already delivered. There are some ambers and greens amongst it, and with delivery dates kind of possibly coming at risk. I just wondered, are there areas within that you're particularly concerned that and is there anything more we can do to help get things back on track? And is there a point of which you add all of that together and you feel that we'll be in a safe place? Is there a target date for getting to that point? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Chris?
Thank you. A specific point regarding the Embrace report, but it could be something that leads to other things. One is that you say there are problems in the collection of case notes to review some of the the stillbirth deaths at St George's. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about what the issue with case notes is, because that could be a sign of, I don't know, either are they just lost in filing, or is it that people aren't filling out case notes properly? And
Thank you, Chris. I can't see any other hands for now, Arlene. So I don't know where you want to start. I'll leave it with you. You might want to deal with the specifics and then offer some commentary on the broader themes, but Jacqueline may or others may well want to come in because I think it's really important that while Arlene's fronting this is not about Arlene. Let's be quite clear about that. And I certainly don't want Arlene, who's doing all the answering, to feel that it's all down to her, because it's a collective. Is that okay, Arlene? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start with non-compliance with CNST, and then are we safe, which was Anne's question. And I think it is a really good question, and what we will try to do is to ensure that we reflect that answer. Is it so what, isn't it? So in terms of the areas that we're probably not going to be compliant, it's not that the care isn't being delivered. So for instance, the problem in George's is around the fact that the Euroking is not capturing the data. So, and that specific data is around, have we asked the woman at 36 weeks whether she still smokes, is smoking, and needs any help? So that is happening. It's just the data is not being captured. And because the data, the way the data is submitted, has to be submitted to CNST, that's the risk. So the mitigation for that, I have said, it needs to be a manual audit of the data, because we can submit that as well. But the question is being asked. For transitional care, the issue is around, as I said, we don't have neonatal trained nurses working on the ward, and although not as part of the establishment, we do have support from the neonatal team, and actually they are co-located with the wards to support the care of the babies at Epsom and St Helier. At St George's, they identify those babies with a red hat so that everybody knows. So there's still a little bit more we can do maybe at Epsom and St Helier to identify the babies much more easily, but they're all identified on the handover and on the board. So the care is still being delivered safely. It's just that the standard is that we have to have X number of neonatal nurses, and we don't have those built into the establishment. Safe care is being delivered. So that's the first thing, and I'll ensure that we have that included in future reports. Jenny's question around the reports that we were receiving here didn't indicate any concerns. You know what, we have all been scratching our heads as to what data would we bring here that could tell us that we didn't have a triage system, an SOP in George's maternity, and I'm not sure that anything we could bring here would tell us that. And so it's about, for me and the teams and working with the national team, you know, hotline to the national midwifery team, is what else can I do, what else can I do, and as part, as the chief nurse, but also as part of this board, to help the board understand the concerns. CQC look at different things to what we look at, and I think we had a meeting last week with Jacqueline where Susie Crowe, who is the national obstetric lead in London certainly, was saying, you know, what data tells you if it's safe? Because, you know, we look at outcomes, don't we? And we think outcomes are good, that means it's safe. Not necessarily. And she referred to one particular report which is pending, where, you know, great outcomes, but if you speak to staff on the ground, they're not happy. The doctors don't talk, you know, obstetricians don't work with midwives and all of that. There's no data that's going to tell you that. But we have to look at how we get to that place where we recognize some of these. Peter, you asked about action plan dates and the risks. So all of this action plan that is included there was to the end of June. We have still worked through all of the green, because we turn them blue if they're complete, green and ambers, and the only outstanding one is the establishment review, which we are continuing with. And the Embrace Notes review is around, we can't find them where they're filed as opposed to incomplete. So we still have a couple that are like that, and the team will produce a report in the end, noting that if we still can't get them. I think that's everything.
Thank you, Arlene. Yes, that's everything on my list. I think this question about what is a safe service and how can we know goes to the heart of the problem. And it's my kind of third element, really. We haven't yet got an answer to it. But as Arlene said, we had a very good meeting with the London regional team, who'd also been the Ockenden team, actually. And we made the point about the assurance we'd taken as a board from Ockenden. And they said to us it was really difficult to be able to describe what the right information should be. And I think what that tells us is there is no easy answer. And that's why I said we would come back to, as a board, and do some thinking together in a developmental session to try and tease this out. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas. I think a lot of it's to do with soft data, actually, because we get a lot of hard data. And as Arlene said so clearly, our outcomes are good. And the feedback from mothers is good as well. So there are an awful lot of alternative data giving a different picture. So this is a complex issue that we need to spend time on, which you cannot do in a public board. It's not possible. But that is going to be programmed for later this month, and the regional team will come and help us in relation to that. So I think all of that is really helpful. And I do want to say that CSNT on its own does not answer the question, what is a safe service? It's an inadequate measure, which is why my early thinking is all about soft information and how we gather that. But I don't think we can have that discussion now. Richard's indicated that he'd like to come in, and I'd like him to, and then I'd like Jacqueline to say something. And then I think we need to focus on the recommendations and recognise that we will be taking this forward rapidly, but in another place. Richard.
I think, Gillian, you said much of what I was going to say, but that's fine. I mean, when we focus, as quite rightly we are, on something really important, then we make sure that the board is seeing enough information, particularly when the CQC has criticised us and said we didn't fully understand what was going on the ground. But there is a risk, isn't there, that we'll fail to see the wood for the trees as we get presented with more and more information. And to Anne's very fundamental and proper question, are we safe? Safety is a mix of how we're managing risk and what our actual real-time outcomes are. And a lot of the CQC criticism is about how robustly we're foreseeing and managing risks with staffing and with quality oversight and governance. But getting the balance right in what the board sees between the emphasis on outcomes and the emphasis on how we manage risk, I think, is an important part of answering Anne's question.
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful reflection. Jacqueline, would you like to just I just think as Group Chief Executive, given the seriousness of this particular part of the report, because the report is more than the CQC inspection of George's, would you like to just close the discussion down?
So I think as you started with Gillian, it is a gut punch receiving the report and realising that despite your best efforts to oversee the maternity department at George's, what actually we got back was not what we were expecting. And prior to the group becoming a group, we did do a huge amount of work in maternity because there was clearly issues in there, and they are cultural and relationship issues rather than anything else. But we know, particularly from the work of Michael West and what we saw in our own cardiac department, that if you let these relationships fester over a long period of time, you will end up with poor outcomes. And I suppose the first thing I think as well, at least we've had a warning to go in and fix that before actually it affects women, because we do know our outcomes are good, as you said, Gillian, and we had an excellent CQC maternal feedback last year. But that when you start to hunt for the data, which I did, because when you get that and you feel hugely responsible for it, you want to go and try and understand how did we get here and how didn't I or we see that. So there's a lot of data there. As you said, the hard data, i.e. turnover, it's less than the George's average. That, you know, we had more staff than actually we had in the budget. So all of that makes it look a lot better. But the actual, when you get underneath that and you look at some of the freedom to speak up issues that we had, and you look at as I did, the exit interviews over the last 2 years, so I've got all the exit interviews over the last 2 years, you can see the relationships, particularly not between doctors and midwives, actually, that's not the issue. The issue is between the band 6s and 7s, the 7s and 8s, and the 8s. And so those are the issues, and those are the issues that the CQC don't pick up about the culture and the relationship. But when you look at that, we know that the governance, which is sort of what the CQC have told us, isn't there because we haven't been seeing some of this or feeling it or hearing it, the relationships and the culture. So those are the wider bits that, whilst they're not in a CQC action plan, you can tick off and say, yes, we've got a policy. It is about a longer term, how do we address the issues that they have with each other and how that affects or could affect and we stop that happening. So that was all I wanted to say, Gillian.
That's very helpful, thank you. I can't see any other hands. I'd like to take us to the sorry, Aruna, did you want to come in?
It's fine. I mean, if we're out of time, that's okay. We can carry on.
Please, it's important. You're the maternity safety champion for ESTH.
So. Well, I think a lot of what I wanted to say was probably covered. I guess perhaps I would just, in my own head, summarise it as these are complex things. It's not just about one thing, it's the mechanics and the dynamics. And I think in that context, I welcome the fact that we have now combined the governance and the culture review. And I think it's the right way to approach it because they are intrinsically linked.
Thank you very much indeed, Aruna. That's really helpful. So there's 2 sets of recommendations in the paperwork, which I think is slightly unhelpful. And there's also a comment about assurance. So if I can just deal with the assurance, I would prefer the board to use the Quality Committee paperwork in relation to assurance, which sets out quite clearly a differentiation between George's and ESTH. And I don't want there to be any ambiguity about that. And then there is a more detailed set of recommendations in the detailed report rather than the cover report. So if we could turn to that, we're asked to note the compliance status against CNST, and I think we've had a very clear explanation from Arlene, and we've covered that. Note the Quality Committee and Board will receive regular updates regarding progress against the CNST MIS, and we have done now for over a year. Note the formal closure of the 29A warning notice and the development of the must do, should do, and receive the report for assurance. And the final point, which is about making recommendations for any further action, that is about the further development session that we will have how we get to grips with the questions about how we can be confident about the service. And I don't think I heard any other recommendations at this stage. Did you want to come in, Jacqueline?
I just want to say one thing, because I was looking at this thinking we have George's and Epsom and St Helier, and whilst we're beginning to try and get the three working together, I think it's really helpful that we look at Epsom and St Helier, because I don't want it to be lost between that we do have 3 maternity units that we have to oversee and manage. I much prefer we break it down that way.
And I think, certainly in my thinking and Arlene's description, I think we do that. Though we need to recognise that ESTH is one trust. It's got 2 units, but it's one trust. James, did you want to? I thought you were on the point of wanting to say something.
Earlier, I was going to make the same points that Gillian, you and Richard both made about how we get assurance around this. I mean, I would say that in terms of ESTH, I think there are some trust-wide issues, but equally there are some issues that specifically relate to each unit. So I think it's about making sure that we understand what data needs to be at unit level and what data can be at trust level.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. And whilst Arlene has fronted all of this, I think we need to be very clear of the role of managing directors of both George's and ESTH in this, and the role of the chief nurse and the chief medical director. CMO. I got your title wrong, Richard. Forgive me. But as I say, we will have this other session, and we will be able to explore these things in greater depth and more fully. And I think that will help us all. Okay, people happy to endorse? Anne?
I think it was the point that you were making, but the wording, receive the report for assurance. I mean, I think we can receive it towards assurance, but we're not assured. And so I'm kind of uncomfortable with the way that's worded.
Sorry, I meant that we take assurance. We've got I think the Quality Committee sets it out clearly. There is reasonable assurance for ESTH, and there isn't at the moment for George's. But as you expressed it, we've got a degree of assurance about all the work that Arlene has described. But does that mean we have an overall assurance about the service? Clearly not. And it's vital that we differentiate between the two trusts because they're in different places. Yeah. So thank you for helping the clarification of that. That was clearly where I meant to get to. Is that okay? Everybody content with that? Right, okay, thank you. We're a bit behind, but that was obviously a vital and important discussion. I'm going to move on to 2.2, but I'm going to ask Martin if he will just start this, because I just need to go out for a couple of minutes. Is that okay, Martin?
Sure, yeah. So, James.
Thank you, Martin.
That wasn't very difficult, was it?
That's called a hospital pass.
That's seamless and beautifully chaired. Thank you, Martin. So we're discussing the IQPR, and what is presented before us is the timing's quite challenging here because the data is quite old. So this is June data that we're reviewing that has been discussed within the July subcommittees. There was not the usual run of subcommittees in August, so I anticipate for future board meetings we'll be looking at more contemporaneous data. I suggest that we take the Kate and then James and then Thurza to talk through St George's, Epsom, St Helier and integrated care, but some areas that I would like to highlight. In terms of elective care, I think, Kate, you raised the spectre of industrial action, which I think runs through some of the data that we're seeing, that despite a lot of really positive work in terms of transformation and activity focus and productivity focus, we are now starting to see a rising number of patients on the waiting list. And some of the improvements that we had seen in the very long waiting patients waiting 52 weeks and 65 weeks, we've seen an upturn that is more marked at Epsom St Helier than St George's, and I'm sure James will comment on that in more detail. Having said that, there are some strong positives in this report. Diagnostic performance, particularly at St George's, is excellent and amongst the best in London, and cancer performance has maintained excellent performance at Epsom St Helier, and after a challenging year is improving at St George's. We continue to be challenged on some of our non-elective care, and I'm sure we'll hear about some of the flow challenges, we didn't achieve the 76% 4-hour wait target for June in either Epsom St Helier or St George's, but there has been a lot of good work at both trusts that I'm sure we'll hear about. In terms of quality, I think we should note the sustained improvement of falls with harm at St George's and the maintenance of that work, which had been led by a QI process at Epsom St Helier, but also note some of the challenging data at Epsom St Helier in terms of data such as VTE compliance and continued challenges in terms of the data on mortality. And then moving on to integrated care, it's good to see that we're achieving the urgent care response both in Surrey Downs and Sutton, and really importantly seeing an increase in referrals from the Sutton end of the population, and hopefully this translates to fewer avoidable admissions to both of our trusts. And Thurza may want to comment on the ongoing challenges on the back end of the pathway in terms of the challenges on pathway 3, and I'll allow Thurza to describe that in more detail later. But perhaps if we move to Kate first to pick up the George's position.
Thank you, James. So I'm going to start with elective, and I'm going to do very light touch. I'm also very happy to take any questions. I think all of what I'm describing now is within the sort of context of industrial action and having to sort of manage periods of time when we're just able to do less work. Our RTT waiting list, it continues to rise, but actually not substantially. We're sort of generally holding the line on that, but we're not making inroads into reducing it. And I do think that has had the strike action has had a big impact on that. Our outpatient activity was above plan in June at 115%, and our elective and day case activity was 108% versus 115% that we're seeking to achieve. However, I do think that's, you know, we've done quite a lot of analysis around that, and a lot of that differential is linked to industrial action. Our 52-week waiters, our target is 600, and we're bang on in June, and we're just trying to turn that back down again because we were below target. However, we're continuing to sort of be well below target on our 65-week waiters. We've got 63 versus the target of 168. And there was a slight improvement in RTT performance in June. In terms of diagnostic weights, as James has said, good performance in June at 98.8%. We have a bit of an issue with sleep studies, and we know there have been issues in other parts of the sector, not at Epsom St Helier as such, but other parts of the sector that's seen a growth in referrals, and we're also quite challenged around sleep study capacity. So that sort of creates some challenge with meeting that target fully. Theatre productivity capped is 74% and uncapped 82%. We've managed to keep the average cases per session above the 1920 levels, but what we're doing is preparing a deep dive for Finance Committee so we can share a full understanding of what the challenges are around productivity in theatres and what the various streams of work we're doing to address those challenges. Cancer, we're maintaining our faster diagnosis standard. You may be aware that the cancer targets are changing, so our 2-week wait has been quite challenging for us, and was 82% in June, but it remains under pressure as we get nearer to the time we're at now. However, that is a standard that's going to be dropped in terms of a measurement, but it's an important measurement of people, making sure people get to be seen first in order to hit the faster diagnostic standard. So we'll continue to oversee it, but it won't be formally measured. And our 62-day was 66%, slightly down on the month before. We've got a very focused plan around some more challenge pathways around urology, skin, breast, head and neck. You always see skin activity going up over the summer as people get their skin out and the sun comes out. We know this happens every year, but it's really hard to match demand, capacity to that demand. So we often see a blip in the summer and also just with summer holidays, and then of course if you throw industrial action in as well. So I think these sort of more when we're seeing consultants striking alongside junior doctors, that really does put pressure on our cancer waiting times. And as a result, we've brought our backlog right down to 90, which is a fantastic achievement. That has crept right back up again to 134. So we really need to focus on bringing that down, because that is a marker to performance in the future, to positive performance in the future. We've been running perfect weeks every so often. So there was one quite recently, and we've been running one this week to really focus on a number of specific challenges, and they've proved quite successful, and they're sort of led by Tara Arku. And the good and really positive thing to feedback is our patient cancer experience score is still, it came back recently and is still very good at St George's, 9 against the national score of 8.9, and we've got no responses below the expected range, which is really good. So we're pleased to see that that improvement has been maintained. In terms of urgent and emergency care, as James said, June actually was a really challenging month. I'm not really sure why it was. Activity was higher, flow was slower, length of stay was longer. It was felt across the system. We've certainly had improvement since June. We've been working really hard with our emergency department to re-establish what's known as the clinical decisions unit. So when people need to stay beyond the 4 hours, they're in a separate space and having that treatment. But when we have higher DTA delayed admissions, then that area gets used for other purposes. We had a particular issue with non-admitted performance as well in June, but that has significantly improved since. Our handover delays, ambulance handover delays, we've maintained really good performance around 30 minutes, but 60 minutes was challenged in June. We are going to be starting a pilot at St George's on behalf of South West London of the 45-minute handover pilot with LAS. We've been working with LAS and the ICB to get that set up. We're commencing that on the 11th of, it's on Monday effectively, on the 11th of September, and this will mean that at 45 minutes, the London ambulance will hand the patient over to our care, and they will go and it will release the ambulance. That it has been trialled and it's been utilised in other sectors, and we've been up to Northwick Park, who have implemented this a while ago, and we can see it can be quite challenging in terms of numbers of patients coming in. So we've agreed
Kate,
to set.
I don't want to interrupt, but could you speed up a bit? Because
Sorry,
a lot of this detail's been through
Fine.
committee.
Okay, no problem. So that was the last thing I was going to say about the handover delays. That was it. I'm on my last point.
I was trying to find the right point.
No, fine, fair enough.
Sorry I interrupted.
So we're trialling that on Monday, and then we'll see how that goes, and we'll share learning across the sector. So that's me done.
Okay, so James?
And just a few things to add to the report for me. I think on the elective side, what's probably most pleasing for me is that the overall waiting list has sort of stabilised really coming into June, and actually, diving into a little bit of data, a little bit more, the number of patients who were kind of undated, so that we hadn't actually sort of got in, had started to stabilise as well, which sort of means that in sort of overall terms, I think that our activity and productivity has increased, and we're trying to find that equilibrium between supply and demand. Obviously, what you see with the 52 and 65 week waiters is within that, there are still some very specific and very difficult pressures, and the two most notable ones continue to be community paediatrics and gynecology. We have been able to agree some changes to what our community paediatricians do, which will help a little bit with that, but it's not going to go all the way. And we've also been working quite closely with our gynecology team to look at different ways of treating patients and also bringing in some additional capacity. I think that the next stage of discussions that my team and Kate's team are engaged in is talking about, what we do in terms of, looking across the two trusts within the group, because we have some marked inequities in access now in those two particular areas between the two trusts. And I think while I do think that ultimately ESTH might need to seek some further external capacity in those two areas, I think it's a fair challenge to say, actually, before we do that, we need to make sure that we are exhausting the resources that are available to us collectively. In terms of diagnostics, I think that we are close to but not quite at the standard. We have some really entrenched challenges with workforce, particularly in some of the more difficult to staff diagnostic modalities, for example, around echo and non-obstetric ultrasound. And we will need to continue to work through how we staff those. I think the reality is we're in a very, very competitive labour market in some of those areas, and I think they're going to continue to be a challenge. Cancer performance, as James said, it continues to be quite strong, particularly on the 31 and 62-day metrics. I do think there is a problem with the 14-day metric, which is falling out of the national cancer standards now, because there's an understanding that it's not necessarily hugely relevant to a clinically effective pathway in a number of areas. But we do know that, particularly in dermatology and again in gynecology, that there is simply not the consultant workforce to see the volume of two-week rule referrals that we're now getting within the two-week standard. And I think the focus will increasingly shift to making sure that we see people in a timely enough way that their overall outcomes are not affected by any longer wait for that first appointment. And I think that's right. That's where the focus should be, and I think that's why FDS and 62 days as the two key standards is so important. We also had a difficult month on emergency care. We are looking at, I think, two key areas. So the first is looking at some internal pathway transformations about how we improve the flow between our emergency departments and our acute medical units and our downstream wards, because we know that there are a number of things that we can do to use our bed stock more efficiently, and we've got quite a well-established emergency care transformation programme around that. And the second is, I alluded to it earlier, that we have sort of at a very high level, it's been indicated to us that we are to receive national funding to increase our bed capacity, because it's acknowledged that we're actually, we have got some genuine constraints around capacity, and we are working through with South West London Integrated Care Board how we access that money, how we stand up the capacity. They've asked for a number of further assurances around how we would exit from it, because sadly it's not been confirmed that the money for bed capacity is actually recurrent, which is slightly odd. So we're just working that through, but I do think that as well as needing to improve internal flow, there are challenges for both the St Helier and the Epsom site. We've net lost beds in a couple of areas over the last few years, and so I think having a different model of inpatient provision, which Sutton's never had any rehab beds, so we're looking at trying to do that, working with Thurs's team, and it's about the Buckley issue that was highlighted earlier for Epsom. The final thing I'm going to say is actually a workforce point, which is obviously the board heard the feedback from many members of staff walking around about bank rates earlier. Actually, if you look at the data in the back of the pack in terms of our agency usage and our bank usage, you will see that notwithstanding some of that feedback from staff, actually since we implemented the changes, we've continued to see increases in bank fill. So there are some challenges with staff, but I do think that overall the changes we made have contributed to improved bank usage. Thanks.
Yeah, point well made. It is very clear in the data. Martin, did you want to comment specifically on this?
Yes, I did. I did notice, and it was great to see it, particularly as it's such a key issue in terms of cost control, because we can control it. And one of the benefits of the group is that clearly we get to make comparisons. And I noticed that the Georgia's data is either about the same or arguably is going slightly up in terms of agency usage. Bit of an obvious question, but I wondered what was different about what we were doing at Epsom and St Helier compared to what we're doing at George's.
Did you want to say anything on that, Kate?
Well, certainly we're very focused on agency reduction, but we have noted that Epsom and St Helier are doing better than us. So it's certainly I think you and George have had some discussions, haven't you? Comment, Lizzie.
I think it's worth noting as well, we were starting from a different start point. So our position and usage was much higher in the first place than George's as well. But yeah, we are working together to look at what we can do together to improve it further.
Okay, I've got lots of hands now, and actually the presentations haven't finished yet because Thurs has still got to come in. So I'm going to take the questions on what Kate and James have had to say. And I haven't forgotten you, Thurza. I'll come to you. I'm going to take all the questions, though, because otherwise we will be here forever, backwards and forwards. I think we've dealt with Martin's question. I've got Aruna, Anne, and then Peter for now, but and Chris. And Derek. Okay.
So, my points may be covered by the preceding question.
Indeed. Let's go. Aruna.
Yeah, I just think for completeness from James's perspective to touch on really the VTE, which is stubbornly not where it needs to be for Epsom St Helier. I think the other one is the mortality, just to get a little bit more insight in terms of what that's been telling us more recently. And then the final one, really, ward accreditation for ESTH and when we think that will be completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Aruna. Anne?
So a couple of points that probably don't need to be picked up now. But I guess when I was reading the overarching report about successes, this is a public document, and we've written in here some things that we probably recognise as success. If you're a member of the public, where it says we've got 4 incidents resulting in moderate or above harm, 2 severe harm, and we've put that in as a success. And I kind of wonder if you were a member of the public reading that, whether or not you might need a little bit more context to explain why that was a success. And then the other point, which I think we might need to pick up in the Finance Committee, and it's kind of relates to the points that Kate was making about outpatients. Because I note when I read the detail that we're preparing for waiting list initiatives. And I wondered whether we've explored fully, this is the tension between money and delivery. Have we met all of our productivity metrics around outpatients before we're considering this? And if not, maybe we should pick that up in the Finance Committee.
Oh, absolutely, Anne. The productivity question extends across various elements.
And we do, sorry, Julian, we have, because I chair the elective board for the sector, we have been very clear in there as well and challenged in both there and in the committee and chairs on behalf of the ICB that we shouldn't be doing that until we've met productivity.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, just kind of well done for keeping going in very challenging, so moving things forward. That's both to Kate and James. But the question was really, you've raised or discussed about the impact of industrial action. And I'm just trying to get my head around the patient impact rather than just talking large numbers. If I was waiting for a hip replacement, for example, or another standard procedure that I may have been waiting 4 months previously, it's now 6 months, or where you would have wanted to be if it wasn't for that, or other steps. Can you? It's trying to make it a bit more real in terms of what it might mean for people. Can you give us any sense of that? Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Chris?
Thank you. This is about patient-initiated follow-up and advice and guidance. It looks to me from what we've got that Epsom St Helier is either relatively or absolutely doing very well on what is, delivering better care to patients because it's efficient and user-friendly, and it means we've got problems with capacity and it speeds that through, whereas St George's is not doing so well. I was interested on PIFU. The Epsom St Helier team are involved in St George's PIFU design as it is a process they will inherit. But I didn't quite understand why Epsom St Helier, who are very successful at PIFU, are inheriting a system from the trust that isn't so successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good question. Derek?
Yeah, I just had 4 very quick points, and I appreciate these may need to be answered outside of board, but I'd like to raise them. I think the impact of industrial action really is something that we shouldn't understate, because not just in terms of numbers and days lost and Christmas Day cover, but also the soft impact, and I think that's the environment within which we're working. And it strikes me with no end in sight, do we need to begin to see industrial action as the new norm, and that we build our systems rather than saying, oh, the waiting list goes up because of industrial action, we have to recalculate our capacity with an industrial action deduction in what our capacity is. So if we lose 10% of our activity, I know it's much more complicated than that, do we need to replan our activity to achieve reasonable waiting lists with 90% capacity, because we know that 10% is going to be wiped out with ongoing industrial action? That may be a pessimistic view, but I can't see an immediate end to it. So it's about, do we have to replan with industrial action as the new norm? Secondly, I presume that increasing advice and guidance is a good thing, because we're moving activity into a more appropriate setting. I wasn't quite sure whether that almost exponential rise at ESTH was good. I think it's good, but maybe just clarification. Moving appointments in dermatology and cancer care to 2-week rule from routine care, it says it creates additional capacity, but it doesn't create additional capacity, it just moves it. Are we reclassifying appointments for what they should be? And finally, I was a bit struck by the monthly overview of people, which on my document is page 51, where the whole of ESTH is red for every activity, apart from agency spend, which is great, and that's good to see that we've got a control and a grip on that. But everything else on there is red, and I think that needs an action plan, you know, if everything's red and all the curves are going in the wrong way, apart from agency spend. So that worries me, that we need to get a grip on what's going on there. Have we got the wrong measures, or do we really have a bigger problem there than we've perhaps been picking up? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Derek. I can't see any other hands. I'm not encouraging them because we've got a lot. I think we had too, if I may say so, we probably had too much introduction and we need more time for questions. You know, action note for us all for next time. Aruna's points, I think, are probably for Arlene and I don't really know how is the best way to do this. Is it best to give it to you, James, for VTE, ward accreditation and mortality, or to give it to Arlene and Richard?
I think it's for Arlene and Richard, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that was my feeling, and then I suddenly thought, oh, well, I'd better check. So Arlene, VTE and ward accreditation, Richard, mortality.
So on the VTE, yes, we appear to be stuck at F7 St Helier. The work that we are doing to integrate corporate services will help us to be able to apply the learning. Not that we're not able to now, I think, but because we're working as two separate teams, where VTE sits in F7 St Helier is different to where it sits in George's, and we need to bring that team together so that we can do the focus work required to improve at F7 St Helier, and that work is planned and we're just working through the integration for that. And on ward accreditation is actually in full flow at F7 St Helier, to the point where one ward has now been inspected 4 times because they were bronze, you know, we're now moving on to, you know, you can't continue to have bronze 4 times. So that work is started. Again, the integration work will help us to start comparing like to like, which is because it's slightly different at St George's. So that work is well underway, and we've talked, or Jacqueline certainly has, put a challenge around us presenting a tartan rug, which will include where every single ward is on ward accreditation. So we will get much more visibility of it.
Richard, did you want to say something on mortality? I'm conscious that a lot of these issues have been discussed very thoroughly in other places. So I think it's okay for execs to give shorthand responses and refer to other discussion. I mean, the mortality question is huge. We've spent absolute hours on it, so I don't need you, Richard, to give an account of all of that. But can you do a headline, a kind of elevator pitch answer to Aruna's question?
Sure. As you say, Jane, we've talked a lot about this in Quality Committee. I think the main area of focus is the mortality at Epsom St Helier, and you can see that the HSMR is higher than the upper process limit, but is actually quite stable. It's come down a little bit in the last year. And the shimmy, which takes into account mortality at 30 days after discharge, possibly has peaked and possibly is starting to plateau, but it's not quite clear. If we're summarising the actions that we're taking, I think the most important things that we're doing are those things around patient safety that we know are important, and strengthening the critical care outreach team is certainly one of them. But we're also continuing to explore our data in different ways to try and better understand this, and we're having a particular focus on mortality in A&E and also in those patients who've been readmitted after being discharged. So we're not taking our focus off trying to understand it, but I think the most important thing is what we're doing to try and strengthen patient safety at Epsom and St Helier, particularly through critical care outreach.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. And of course, this is something that is being carefully scrutinised on an ongoing basis by the Quality Committee. James, could you answer Anne's question about this is a public document and we've described something as a success that wouldn't appear to be a success to a layperson?
Thank you. I think there's some more work needed in terms of how do we coordinate the front pages for that come to the Quality Committee and the Finance Committee. There's an appointment of a new Group Director of Performance and PMO started this week. And one of the pieces of work that I want to do with him in conjunction with the leads for performance and quality is to get a more standardised and arm's length view in terms of how we're reporting the front sheets.
I think that will be helpful, recognising that we've got to get this balance right between the detail that is done in subcommittees and then what is presented to board, because there is a risk that we just rerun the whole thing, which is not good use of anybody's time.
Gillian, I wonder if I could also pick up the question about PIFU and advice and guidance.
I was actually going to ask you to do that, because I thought it was best it came from you.
Yes, it is a good thing that there's a lot of advice and guidance and patient-initiated follow-up being instigated at Epsom St Helier, and it's a really positive transformation piece of work. Some of the challenges at St George's relate to the existing IT structures that support the coding and capture of that data. The relationship of the comment about adopting the processes at St George's relate to the fact that Epsom St Helier are implementing Cerner, and from April will be using the same Cerner system as St George's. St George's are starting a fix that from October, in a phased way between October and March, there will be the ability to capture advice and guidance and patient-initiated follow-up in a robust way. So by the time Epsom St Helier implement their Cerner, this should not be a challenge. But the most important thing is about what are the cultural practices and behaviours at clinician level to support the ongoing work.
Thank you very much indeed, James. So the next one on my list is Peter's point, which was prefaced, I thought, wisely by a well done, and thank you for that, Peter, about the impact on the patient. I'm not sure it's easy to answer here. And the short answer is it's awful for patients, isn't it? They're messed about endlessly. But perhaps, Kate and James, you can think about whether there's a way of enabling the board to understand that in more granular detail, you know, whether there's information about numbers and all that kind of thing. You're frowning at me, James.
He's thinking. The cogs are going.
I'm thinking because I think we've been asked to do this somewhere. I think we've been asked by FIC to do some more work on this for the end of September.
Yeah, I think more around the loss of activity, but I think we can build that into. If we can take that one away and think about how we can represent that.
That would be really helpful.
Can I add another bit to that bit? Sorry.
I'm trying to keep
very briefly.
I'm trying to keep it simple.
I think we also need to say thank you to our admin and clerical staff, who are the people at the brunt of this, who are cancelling patients and rebooking them, and it's them who get patients getting upset with them. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's a point really well made. Then I think that takes us to Derek's points. Some of them are a bit philosophical, I think. No, don't apologise, Derek, but is industrial action the new normal? I think that opens up a very complex question, and there'll certainly be a view from the NHS centrally about the basis on which you plan. So I'm not sure we can say anything more helpful about that at this stage. I think there was a specific, though, that we really do need to respond to, and it's your point about all reds in people. So, James, if you could respond on that.
Yeah. So just actually looking at the metrics, I mean, I think this is probably something we need to look at in terms of the way that this data is presented. I mean, my interpretation of it, and I'm now struggling to find it, was that what it actually showed was that mandatory training was going up, sickness and turnover were going down, and the percentage of BAME staff at band 6 or above was going up as well. So I think my interpretation was that although we had reds that were driven by the KPIs we'd set ourselves, that the trends were in the right direction once you got into the detail of what the individual metric was. Clearly up is good and down is good depending on which the metric is, and I think that makes it a little bit hard to interpret it on a sort of first glance. So my view is that the metrics are all either stable or moving in the right direction, but clearly that's not what the report actually says.
Well, it's probably another presentational point that the new arrival member of staff can look at. I think. I think the final point that I've got, because I'm conscious we've still got to get to Thursday, is Anne's point about productivity issues. I'm not sure we should have a discussion here, Anne. It's a matter for Finance Committee, and I know you're very cited on it, and it's both in relation to outpatients, but also elective, where some of the percentages of theatre utilisation are just not where we need them to be. So my personal view, you know my view on this, is that they're the things we need to address before we're talking about other things. Did you want to come back on that, Anne?
Only to say, I agree with you, we should deal with it in the Finance Committee. I thought it was an important point to make in public.
I agree, which is why there is always this balance to be struck. And I suspect that's where Aruna was coming from on the mortality, that we spend a lot of time discussing all of these things, and you can give an impression at a public board that we're not pursuing them when we are. So I think all of the points are very well made, and I'm sorry I've hurried people along, but we do have a very large agenda, and we've still got other material to get through that needs proper discussion. So Thursday.
I will be brief. I suppose I have been thinking over the board meeting that these are performance metrics. We do spend a lot of time elsewhere looking at impact metrics, and I'm wondering whether we need to look outside this about how we bring that visibility to the board. And when I talk about impact metrics, we measure them very much about, are we, for the investment we make, are we providing the care in the setting that is right for the person to, so I think that that's something that we need to look at how we do it. If I just pick up the performance metrics, they reflect what's been talked about here. So on both Surrey Downs and Sutton run the transfer of care hubs. They are truly multi-professional, multi-agency integrated hubs. That is very different in the Georges space, so we shouldn't take for granted the advantage that that gives us. You can see by the measures that we have that pathway 2, which is people who need to go to bedded care but not acute care, in the Sutton area there is a long wait for those beds, and that is both the lack of rehabilitation and the decisions taken by South West London not to continue with some of that rehabilitation bedded care. And that is one impact. If we then look at pathway 3, which is the amount of time it takes people who will be going home to a different setting to the one that they came in, so going into care homes, we continue to see an improvement on the Surrey Downs side, but it is not as much as we would like it to be. But we have a range of initiatives that are supporting that change. The only other thing I would pick up from the data is that we run 2 virtual wards, one for Sutton, one for Surrey Downs. Both are very well regarded, and we're getting very good feedback from clinicians who use them, from patients and from carers, but both are running under capacity. So there is more work that we need to do in terms of promoting the use of the virtual wards, and we do promote it when we talk about flow in the hospital. When we get asked about beds, we do say we have capacity in virtual wards. They are both consultant run, and they are run by very expert clinicians. So I think there's more work we need to do there. And then just finally, for the virtual wards for Sutton, the length of stay on the virtual wards is actually very short, and we need to understand the cohort of patients that are coming through who only need 2 days on a virtual ward, because you would expect someone who needed to go onto a virtual ward to actually need longer than that. That's it.
Thank you very much indeed, Thursday. Well done. So, questions? Yeah?
Is that all right?
Of course.
Thank you, Thursday. I think all that will be helpful. And I suppose the bit that I'm also thinking about, because I've just got the patients not meeting criteria to reside slide in front of me, is that interface between Surrey Downs Health and Care and Sutton Health and Care. Because when I look at the criteria to reside, and I know it's not all in the gift of our integrated care services, George's is got, 1,000, 1,200 beds, and I think we've got 700 Epsom St Helier, but the amount of Epsom St Helier is quite a bit more now than George's. And and equally, I know there might be something about the local population we have, etc., but I'm just wondering if that is a thing, if that is a place where we need to really look at that integration, which goes back to your point about virtual wards and whether we're getting the right sorts of people sent early enough into them.
Can you have a go at that, Thursday?
Sorry, that was
No.
maybe back for another time. But
I think it's a very valid question. We have a wide range of community services that are available, and it's maximising the use of them, and that should result in a reduction in people not meeting the criteria to reside.
James?
I don't know this for sure as being a contributor, but I would also say that CTR measurement is relatively new and I don't think has been audited anywhere yet. So I think that criteria to reside directionally within a trust is pretty robust as long as you've been counting it consistently, and we've had to change some of our counting because we were on the radar with London for a while because we were beating ourselves up unnecessarily with some things, but nobody has yet looked as to whether CTR and the reasons for not meeting CTR are being consistently measured between organisations.
That's helpful, thank you, James. Any other hands? No? So all that long discussion and we're asked to note the report. It always feels very inadequate, doesn't it? But clearly an enormous number of points have been raised, and I hope that in terms of the public, we've been able to give the right sense of what the committees spend a lot of their time doing. Although clearly there's an opportunity for that under item 3 as well. So the next item is the finance report, and Lizzie, we don't need long introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper sets out the financial performance month 4 year to date for each trust and the risks to delivering the full year plan. Both trusts at month 4 are on plan, excluding the impact of industrial action. And that's all I was going to say.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed.
BGT.
Any questions to Lizzie? No? Okay, so the recommendation there, you've been so quick, I haven't even got the recommendation in front of me. I guess we're noting the financial position in month 4. Yeah, everyone happy with that? Thank you. Right, well, we've caught up a little bit of time, so that's good. But I am going to ask committee chairs under item 3 not to read the report to us, really just to crystallise on the key points that need to be made. And we're starting with Quality Committee report. And Aruna.
Thank you, Chair. So, as Chair says, I will take the report as read. Just really touch on the salient points in the executive summary and then leave time for questions if anybody has any. Maternity services I've spent a lot of time on, so I won't spend any time there. Concerns about mental health concerns presenting to emergency department, that's across both sites really, all 3 sites really, and I think we discussed that a lot at Quality Committee. As trusts, we're doing everything we possibly can in terms of providing specialist care, where we can, side rooms, removing ligatures, but there's a point at which, we really can't do anymore, and it's a system issue, which I think is being discussed, and it is on our risk register, so we're not going to lose sight of it, and continue to look at this and where we've got to with it. The final one really that I was going to touch on is the quality impact assessment on using SIPs. So I think we've again today discussed quite a lot about where's the line between safety and quality, and we as a quality committee were very keen to understand where we have a lot of financial pressures and cost improvement plans. How are we implementing those such that they don't impact safety? And I think we got some assurance in terms of the processes being used where if safety is compromised, then absolutely that isn't a SIP that we will allow, but where quality is compromised, then we really want to have an understanding of what does that mean. So we had a discussion. There is further work to be done that will be brought to Quality Committee next time, and really some insight into what are those SIPs and what impact did they have, so that we can make an assessment that we're not actually compromising quality. The rest of it really was very much routine business, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Aruna. Could I just make a comment about the quality of this report? I thought it was excellent, and provided really clear assurance for the board in a way that was very accessible. So I suspect this is an accolade to you, Stephen, and your team, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because I think it really helps the board's work to have this set out so clearly. So, any questions to Aruna, given that we've already had some very rich discussion? Looks like no. Okay. So that takes us on to the Finance Committee in common. Anne.
Thank you. So we've already talked about the month 4 finance position. We've already talked about the IQPR. So I guess what I would say is, yes, we're on plan, but we signed up to a very risky settlement based on an ambitious cost improvement programs and a set of national assumptions about inflation, what would be funded, pay, and otherwise. And whilst we are at the moment we're managing in a slightly different way than we intended. And that has some quite important implications, both for managing the money, managing the cash, and the position we'll find ourselves in next year. As in, we are delivering more non-recurrent savings and less recurrent savings, which means they don't deliver the cash, and we're in a slightly worse position for next year. And that has implications, for next year. But it means that's why we've sort of raised the risks on finance. Both of the finance risks are at 25, they're top. And I think that's just saying quite how difficult this is. It's becoming clear that some of the things that we were told to assume aren't actually proving to be right. And I think there'll be important discussions at a system level and at a national level about how those issues are managed. The only other point I wanted to make was we have as a committee now finished dealing with infrastructure, IT, estates, whatever. We haven't yet got meetings for the new committee, which we do need to get in the diary quite soon, because we've stopped, but we're in danger of having a void.
A particularly good point. All good points, Anne, but that one about the new committee does need to be actioned. So, any questions for Anne? Can't see anything around the table. Right. Okay. So. We're all doing very well, at the risk of sounding like old Mr. Grace. For those of you who are very old, for those of you younger, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. I'll tell you later. People Committee, Stephen?
Yeah, let me report on that and briefly. So this is a report of one meeting. It's not a transcript of what we went through, but it does, I hope, illustrate the breadth of what we are looking at and some of the depth that we go to. And I thought there were three things that are probably worth commenting on. One, well, let me run through them. So the deep dive on bank and agency management at St George's is important because it's effectively the benchmark. What the committee is interested in is not only how are we doing, but is the in-housing at Epsom and St Helier, which is effectively a jointly managed arrangement with St George's, having a positive impact at both ends. So what we've done is look at what's happening to St George's as the baseline, how are we doing there, what's happening at Epsom and St Helier, and the answer is we seem to be doing okay at both, and we'll continue to monitor progress. What's not in the report is that we went live on the 1st of August with the joint management project, the in-housing at Epsom and St Helier, very significant planning and really good execution, and touch wood, so far that seems to have gone extremely well, and what we're hoping is the current trends that we talked about earlier in the meeting can be maintained. So I think it's a good result, and it's a credit to management that it's come through so well with so little fuss and bother. It's almost not been noticed, which is testament indeed. Second point I'd make is that we continue to monitor quite carefully all of the workforce metrics. We are looking particularly at sickness, vacancies, and appraisal rates. I won't go into the detail on how they are trending, but we are watching them extremely carefully because they carry cost associated with them, and they also carry service quality and particularly corporate and frontline support implications with them. And the third point I was going to pull out was the comment made on diligent page 232 about the growth in establishment, particularly at St George's. Even after we allow for new roles with new funding, we're still seeing a net gain in establishment across both trusts, and that is pushing against a SIP target which saw a reduction in establishment. So it's going the wrong way. There may be good reason, but what we've said is when we see the first half year numbers at the October meetings, we do need a much deeper dive on what's happening to establishment, because to Lizzie's point, if our SIP assumes certain things about overall establishment and spend, and it's complicated by the bank agency part, and this is going in the wrong direction, we've got a headwind that we hadn't budgeted for or expected. So it's a significant issue, and I think to Aruna's point, to points that others have made, triangulating the right position between quality, which is a bit subjective, safety, and the money is something that we'll continue to look at. But we're looking through the people lens, and others are obviously looking through the quality lens and the financial lens. And the good news is they're coming together quite well. So, Gillian, that's all I was going to pull out. Obviously, Martin and I are happy to take questions.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Martin if there's anything you wanted to add, Martin?
Yeah, just very quickly, particularly to endorse Stephen's last point, and to say that we on the back of that people committee, we did have some discussions about the lack of alignment between people and finance, particularly on the data and the messaging, really. And I know that improvements are underway on that. The bit I really wanted to say, though, just because I think it's incredibly important, I don't think otherwise it will get mentioned. We hear a lot about the industrial action, but very rarely about one particular aspect which really worries me, which is that as these things go on, what often happens is you get some people who are more reluctant to strike, and that produces all sorts of relationship problems, people crossing picket lines, people feeling very strongly about striking or not striking. I'm not going to ask as a question because I don't think there's any answer, but I think we need to be really mindful looking to the future that these things only stop in two ways. Either there's a settlement or the unions give up. And when they give up, it usually results in a huge amount of bad feeling. And particularly, given the business we're in, where teamwork is everything, and a lot of the disasters that have happened in the NHS have been where those teams haven't worked well together, or there's been tension between different groups. I think that's a huge risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think that point is really well made. Jacqueline wanted to come in and James, but I think the board does need to hear some preliminary answer to the point about numbers going up at George's.
I just wanted to ask about, we've got a new workforce plan, which is probably the best workforce plan we've had for a long time, if it can be executed over the next 5 to 10 years. But its basis is train, retrain and transform. And where I think where we're being pushed to really look at is that retain bit. And there is evidence from 25 hospitals where they've actually made big inroads into the retain bit of that I'm not seeing us discussing or bringing back what we need to do and how we're implementing that in a way that actually means that we're not having the sorts of conversations about big, a fifth of staff not being in particular areas. And our turnover rate is still quite high in both of our organisations, which makes me feel uncomfortable. So the bit for me is about where we get to talk about that and where we get to actually know what we are doing in our organisations to keep staff with us rather than them moving. And we know there are some moves because we have a lot of younger staff, they want to move, they want to have children, want to buy a house, and often that's more difficult, particularly in the central London bits, but I think there's still more we can do.
It feels like a bit of a statement, really.
Well, it's a question about what...
I'm not sure if it's a question too.
Well, I suppose I would start initially with Nicole, but the bit then is how do we then get sight of it across the organisation up to the committee?
Yeah, before you come in, Nicole, I want to get all the questions because otherwise we lose control. James.
Mine isn't a question either. It was a response to Martin's point about the industrial relations.
Okay, well, would you like to deal with that? And then I'll do
Yeah, sure. So it's just to say, I mean, we have picked up anecdotally some challenges around pressure on staff in terms of decisions whether to strike or not within some very specific areas. It has been, there's been, I think, 3 approaches. I think the first is to, very directly address that where we're aware of specifics. I think the second is to maintain a really positive and collaborative relationship, particularly with the local negotiating committee, who are the trade union representative of the doctors on site, and regular discussions with the chair, who has been, has had a very fine line to walk, I think, in terms of being a member of our consultant body, but also the representative locally of the BMA, and also so just some really clear messaging about respect for everyone's choices, and continually reinforcing that messaging. I think you're right that it does get harder, and I think what we need to be aware of as a board is that in things that are discretionary and locally controlled, like, for example, some of our extra contractual work rates and some of our bank rates and things like that, when the pressure it builds around the nationally set rates and there isn't a resolution, it comes out through things like some of the discussions we then end up having with staff around things like bank rates, and that's increasingly where we feel the pressure, and I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to maintain positive industrial relations through a period if these strikes continue. So I think it is something we will have to be very aware of.
Thank you, James. A helpful comment. Nicole, perhaps you'd like to say something about retention, but I think it's a question back to the executive, really, about how are you going to make sure that that we're getting the right papers and debate and action through the People Committee.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work happens in probably quite a separate. So I think the retention piece is a lot around the kind of cultural work that's happening, the kind of well-being work, and really getting some of the basics right as well. And I think we've got all those work streams kind of running, but I think we probably need to bring it together in more of a retention type plan, and that could be reported in more of a cohesive way, because I think otherwise you get lots of separate pieces that add to that, but don't necessarily give the assurance as a whole.
Well, perhaps we can leave that thought with the executive, and they can reflect on how best that might give the assurance to the People Committee and to board. I can't see any other hands on the People Committee, so I'm going to move on to...
Did you want to ask a question about...
Oh, goodness, yes, thank you for reminding me. I've got an asterisk to it, but my head's in 2 spaces. Get the answers you need and make sure you keep to time. The numbers at George's increasing. What's that about?
So I know that a big chunk of the numbers were us recruiting substantive nursing staff, so you'd expect to see a reduction in a bank and agency, so we need to see that playing through. We have had some areas, and I'll give you an example whereby we have expenditure in specialing, so mental health specialing, so in ED is an example, where we've been using registered mental health nurses, and we want to switch to using mental health support workers because we think it's a more appropriate way of caring for patients and it's a more resilient workforce. However, the posts are not in the budget because this is an overspend. But in making that shift, you do spend less and get a better resource and support for patients. I'll take it away where the rest of the. Can I take that one away, Gillian? Yeah, and we'll sort of come back with I can share it with the board in whatever way you'd like me to.
In fairness, Paul's already taking it away, so that we know he's coming back to us on it. So it wasn't everybody sat there and wondered what was happening. They're off to find it.
No, but I think we can't leave that kind of hanging around loose in a public board meeting. And Martin's point, which he's made before, about the marrying up between staffing and money, it's really hard for non-executives to track that. We find that a constant struggle, and there's regularly discussed at Finance Committee. Right, so Audit Committee, Peter, first of all, George's and then ESTA.
Yeah, thank you. Gillian, I can be brief, and although both reports cover much of the same ground, I think I'll just pick up the George's one first. It starts from just the position the accounts for last year was submitted and a clean set of accounts on time earlier in the summer. So since then, the work has focused on the internal audit, the new partners kind of getting up to speed, starting their audits, and we'll start to see those coming through next month, but not yet. So the main focus in the meantime has been on the areas touched on in the covering note. So good, and in all of these, I think we got good assurance, reasonable assurance around issues that are all important. They may be, for the most part, not in the front line, as it were, but in areas such as data security, cyber, counter-fraud, and conflicts of interest. All signs of progress building on last year's performance. So that's encouraging, but we'll be tracking that closely during the remainder of the year. So I think otherwise I'll just stick at that on the Georges before moving on to the ESTH one. But I'll pause there just in case there's any questions on that.
Sorry, I think this, thank you. I think this probably applies to Epsom St Helier as well, but in terms of the clinical audit programme, which you had a report on, obviously it's great that audit takes place, but is there any monitoring of whether it brings about change in practice, any of these audits?
It's a good question. It's probably maybe more for quality, and Arlene was nodding there, so I suspect you're better informed. That was maybe the wrong time to do that, but essentially just to say the role of the audit committee was just make sure the overall programme was in place, and particularly picking up the point about sharing good practice within the group now, which I think we're doing on the internal audits, and on the clinical side, I think again we were assured more of that is now happening. But on that note,
Richard.
Richard, sorry.
Yes, I think it's probably Richard. And it's a complex subject, actually, and we've had that discussion at Quality Committee before, haven't we? Richard?
Well, answering the question at its simplest level, I guess audits are designed to demonstrate change in practice by picking out the most important things where practice should be done in a certain way, and then sequential audits can show you your progress against the things that you're aiming for. That's quite a literal answer, but I think one snapshot of 1 year's worth of audit activity by definition can't show you a change in practice. But if we continue tracking the same things in key audits year on year, then I think it's up to us to present the data in such a way that we can demonstrate where there's meaningful change, and there will be many examples where there is.
Thank you, Richard. I do think it's something that Quality Committee needs to pay attention to, and we've had that debate there before. So thank you, Chris, for raising that. Right, Peter.
Thank you. Moving rapidly on to ESTH, and again on the plus side, all of those areas that I mentioned in relation to George's around data security, cyber fraud, etc. Again, good work going on, progress being made. So that's we can back that, as it were. The one area that's proven more challenging, however, is sign off of the 22-23 accounts for ESTH, and we're still in a position where there's ongoing work. We're hoping to convene an audit committee in 2 weeks' time to recommend them to the board, and there will then need to be a special board meeting possibly on the Monday ahead of the AGM of ESDH in the evening. It leaves it very tight indeed, but it has to happen before the AGM, as I understand it. So that's the main focus. I'm absolutely clear. I've been working obviously closely with Andrew, Lizzie, and in touch with the lead partner from GT that the home team, as it were, is doing everything that can be done to facilitate, get to the right endpoint. And we're obviously very keen that it should be a clean set of accounts that are finally signed off. There are some, however, some issues I won't go into, but nonetheless with our external partner that have contributed to the delay of getting to this point. But we're working as far as we can to minimise that impact, and then we'll do a lessons learned, shall we say, after the event once they're signed off. So all for now, I think.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you to you, Lizzie, and the team for your work around this. It's the most extraordinary situation, but we are where we are. Any questions on the ESTH audit report? So in relation to all of those reports, we're asked to note and to take the assurance as set out in those reports. People happy to do that? Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. We've done rather well in catching up. We're just a few minutes late now. And we're on to item 4.1, which is the South West London Acute Provider Collaborative Memorandum of Understanding, which is a bit of a mouthful. Jacqueline.
I hope this will be short, Chair. As we are all part of the South West London Provider Collaborative, we have some entities that we all share. Swelliok, which is where we were today, is one of them. South West London Procurement, South West London, there's quite a few South West London Pathology, and one other that has escaped my mind. But we do have an agreement between us, and this is supporting that. This is an update on the one that we signed many years ago, and we thought it was time to actually just get it out, brush it down, refresh it, and make sure that it fits across all 4 organisations that we represent. So it really is just a format, well, hopefully a formality. We've agreed to take this to all of our boards, just so you have sight of it. Happy to try and answer any questions, but hopefully you are happy and content with what is enclosed.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Yin?
It's probably a technical question, so forgive me if it is, but under Diligent 256, paragraph 10, about the expiry of the MOU on the 5th anniversary of the commencement date, I just wondered, will it be automatically renewed after that, or do we need a clause to include that in, unless you think that 5 years is what is called for?
Tell me which it was again.
Sorry, so Diligent 256, paragraph 10.1.
10.1. Yes, I think that's fine, because it's been quite a lot of changes since we did the first one, so I think that's acceptable.
Okay. All right. Any other points? We have to authorise this. Moved on to look at the specific. So that Jacqueline can sign it. Yeah, that's agreed. So that takes us then on to the outpatient transformation and the delegation of authority to finance committees in common.
So I can be relatively brief on this one too. So on the 4th of August, Sir James Mackey and Professor Tim Briggs wrote to all organisations on behalf of NHSE with a relatively short letter but a very complex ask. Recognising the challenges that exist in terms of patients waiting a long time for outpatient appointments and definitive treatment, and seeking assurance and a self-certification of a number of actions, but specifically related to patients who might potentially be waiting 65 weeks or longer for definitive treatment by the end of March. Our plans for reduction in outpatient follow-ups and the validation of patients on the waiting list. This is a really complex and detailed piece of work that Kate and her team and James and his team are working through at the moment and is not yet complete. So as a board, we are not able to sign off our self-certification at this point. So the ask of the board is for the work to continue and to delegate this task to the Finance Committee on the 29th of September, so that we would reach the deadline of submission on the 30th of September.
Thank you, James. Is that clear to everybody? Derek?
I'm glad to flag it, and this is really one for Deirdre. This is where I think there's a typo. The wrong paragraph's been pasted in under risks, because under risks on 4.2 it says about the fit and proper persons test. So I think it's just the wrong text in the wrong place. This is the one I flagged up and couldn't tell you where it was.
Yes, this was the one you flagged up, so we will we'll amend
It's just
that.
a typo
Yes.
that needs to be amended.
Oh, right, yes. So it's just, there's a bit of text
Text
in the
that's
wrong,
got put in the wrong place.
in the
Yes,
wrong
we'll
box.
amend that.
Well
Thank you,
spotted,
Derek.
Derek. Thank you. Right, back to the substance of.
Endorse the content, appreciate the complexity.
Yeah.
And also, this goes back to industrial action. Doing this in context of industrial really difficult. So, yeah, absolutely. No problem with the proposal.
Thank you, Derek. I mean, but your point is so well made. It's a massive piece of work, and it keeps reinforcing the fact that there is, on top of all the things we know and understand, there's these additional tasks that are imposed upon the organisations. And at one level, we understand why the NHS is doing that, but it reinforces the fact that we're not masters of our own destiny in so many ways. And I think it doesn't help with accountabilities, but there we go, it is as it is. And clearly people understand we need to make the submission, and they're happy to delegate it to the Finance Committee. Yeah, good, lovely, thank you. So moving on to item 5, where we've got 2 items for noting. The first is the Healthcare Associated Infection Report. I mean, I know that this was carefully scrutinised at Quality Committee, Arlene. There are some, despite your and the team's best efforts, there are some things going in directions where we feel uncomfortable about. Is there anything you need to say?
Thanks, Julian. No, just that for those things that are going in the wrong direction, there are lots of bits of work that are happening, and the team will continue to work on those. Having said that, the C. diff rate that was really above trajectory for Epsom St. Helier is now back within the trajectory, and the one for St. George's has slowed down. So we are continuing to work on ensuring those are within the levels that we want to see.
Thank you very much indeed, Arlene. So we're asked to receive the report, and I think we particularly need to note that point about management of C. diff and E. coli. Okay? Yeah, thank you. So that takes us on to fit and proper person. Now, this hasn't been to any committee because it's a new requirement that takes us a bit further on than our own changes that we introduced to the fit and proper person test only a couple of months or so ago. Stephen, is there anything you want to say?
Both to note the sort of longer term background to this around the CARC review from 2019, which has obviously taken about 4 years to work through to getting this new framework, but also the more immediate context around the post-LEP-B trial, etc. Yeah. So I guess the key point I'd flag is the timeline for implementation. So some of this kicks in from the end of this month. So that's specifically around the new mandatory references and the introduction of the leadership competency framework for the new appointment of new board members, executive and non-executive. So that starts from the 30th of this month, and then the full implementation of this framework from the end of March 24. Which is when all of the changes and additional information captured on ESR for all board members will need to be in place. So there's a piece of work that's kicking off to make sure we've implemented that.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. And again, not a necessarily straightforward piece of work, but an important one. So we're asked to note the new framework, the key changes introduced, and the high-level plans for implementation. Anne?
You may not know the answer to this yet, Stephen, but the sort of mandatory references for people who leave a board because they've resigned or they've retired, are these agreed references? Because sometimes people leave, don't they, with a sort of a tacit reason and a real reason. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to actually work in practice.
So I think some of the details we need to work through. We did have a bit of a discussion about this at the exec team, and our feeling was they will, certainly everyone will need sight of their references, but they will need to be references that reflect the spirit of the new guidelines. So we've got to work through a bit about the extent to which they're fully agreed or not, because that could itself pose some challenges. So yeah, there's some detail to work through on that quite rapidly.
There's another point that I've made to Paul de Gama, that we need to think about people immediately below board level who come to board. We've got two senior non-board members here representing board members today, and I think we need to think really carefully about how we extend this. And so there are a number of points, I think, that need attention. Martin?
Yeah, Stephen, is there any difference? I couldn't see any difference between NEDs and exec members in this. Is that correct? Is everybody treated the same?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just a comment, but it's slightly odd, given that our contracts as NEDs say that we're not employees, but actually all of this is as if you were an employee, but that's far beyond us anyway.
Yeah, I mean, completely take the point. The new framework doesn't distinguish between them in terms of the information to be captured, the way in which mandatory references need to be implemented, but absolutely. I think just to the point about those one level below board, there are some very specific pieces in the new framework about where there are formal acting up arrangements in place. But I think there is something about the more informal standing in that we need to consider.
And it relates to the reference point, actually. Anyway, we're in danger of having a discussion about another complex set of processes and things, so we mustn't do that. We're asked to note the framework, the changes, and the plans for implementation. Are we happy to do that? Yeah? Yes. Thank you very much, colleagues. So that takes us on then, only 3 minutes over, to any new risks and issues identified. We've had some very full discussions on a lot of very difficult issues today. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, does our risk register and our board assurance framework pick those up adequately? So does anyone think of an area where we may not have covered things as thoroughly as we would like? Industrial action was going through my head when I was thinking about that. I mean, I don't need an answer now, but I think we have got it on our risk register, haven't we? But I
think potentially without repeating it, the point I made, which is perhaps different from the other impacts.
Yeah, the point about relationships and that James commented on.
And I think probably the other thing, it is on the corporate risk register, but I think we also need to reflect post-LEPI in particular about the way in which we articulate the risks around raising concerns on the corporate risk register. So I think we'll want to bring that back through the People Committee later this month.
Yeah. So perhaps we can, outside the meeting, look at both of those and satisfy ourselves that we've got them where we would want to be. Any other thoughts around risks? No, can't see any hands. So next item is any other business, which everyone knows I dislike intensely, especially if I'm surprised by it. I don't know of anything, and I can't see anyone indicating. So that takes us to reflections on the meeting, and I've asked James if he would lead this today. James.
Thank you. So, Gillian, would you like me to just start with a few remarks and then?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Sorry, I'll chair it. You just need to.
No. Sorry, I was just wondering whether I just launched straight in. So, just a few reflections then for me. So, I thought the visit feedback was more focused this time than it has been in the past. I think people were, very clear about some of the key things that they'd heard, and also I felt that we built on each other's remarks with it as well. So, things like the bank issue, I felt that, it had come up in a number of places, and people reflected that the fact that they were building on each other's remarks. And I think we ended up with a smaller number of more sort of concrete things to follow up, which I think is certainly, from my perspective, helpful. I think that there was a growing sense today of us feeling like a genuinely unitary board, and I thought, Gillian, your remarks at the start about the dual NED role of support and challenge set the tone really helpfully, and the tone then through the discussions that we had did find a good balance with that, and reflected the sort of the huge challenge that I think both organisations face at the moment. So I felt that came through really clearly, and in particular, the discussion about maternity for me hit a good tone, and acknowledged where assurance is really hard to gain because of the amount of really sort of different data points and sometimes contradictory data points that the board is trying to deal with. So I felt that it's not sort of throwing our hands up and saying it's too difficult, but there is something about just being reflective as a board where it is quite hard to be assured sometimes about every aspect of something. I think there is still... So the reports from the committees were really good and picked up a lot of the points in the discussions that had been had in the committees. It's quite interesting because we'd spent quite a bit of time sort of jumping around in terms of quite detailed points around the IQPR, and then we got to the reports on the committees where we'd actually picked up a number of those discussions beforehand, and in a way we might have had a slightly different discussion about the IQPR if we'd had the discussion about what the committees had discussed first. And I thought that was something that we could potentially think about, because I think all of us who were involved in that IQPR board report bit know that it goes on too long and it's slightly scattergun. But I don't think any of us have quite worked out how to make it better. So that was my reflections.
Thank you, James. I absolutely agree on the performance report, and maybe the implied suggestion. I don't want to state that you actually recommended it, but maybe if we have the items for assurance first, and then the quality and performance report. I mean, it just felt very hard to keep it coherent. And the other point there, I think, that we're always struggling with is we've had so much discussion in committees. But this is a piece of public accountability. We need to get the balance of that right as well. So we'll take that away and have a think about it. Other comments or reflections from colleagues? James?
Thank you. I agree with everything that James has just said. I think for me, I felt uncomfortable during the IQPR discussion. It didn't feel as though we'd hit a satisfactory point. It's really clear that almost everything that we discussed today in the discussion about the IQPR had been discussed in quite a lot of detail at the board subcommittees, and we need to reflect about how we can represent without spending too long repeating ourselves, but convey the most important information and ensure that our accountability is public. And I really just building on the comments about the maternity conversation, because that did feel really important to me, that we give ourselves enough time to reflect on how we got to where we have found ourselves and how we move forward from here. And I find myself in a slightly odd position because I'm quite a data-driven person, but I think we are awash with data, and we need to genuinely think about the difference between data and true insight, and how we triangulate the information. And a form of insight is the information we get through the visits to the wards beforehand, and I definitely wouldn't want to drop that, but we need to think about how we can get a little bit more rigour into some of the other aspects that provide us with true insight.
Thank you, James. Really helpful. Anybody else got any? Oh, Tim and then Anne. And then we'll probably draw this picture.
And Derek.
Oh, and Derek, right, okay. Tim?
Okay, just briefly, I wanted to say how valuable and enjoyable, actually, I thought the ward visits were this morning. I mean, as a George's Ned, to come into another hospital, another environment, I thought that the opportunity to kind of see what's the same and what's different is actually quite helpful and powerful. I thought the other thing was that we started in the visit that I did, we started to open a little bit of a conversation about working across the group, because we're conscious at board about the value of working across the group, but it was interesting to hear that I was hearing that conversation coming from the floor, if I can put it that way. And I think as we go forward, there could be some further opportunities to just be a bit more pointed at that and actually try and draw some of those conversations out. So I hope we will do more of that in the future.
Thank you, Tim. I think that's a really good point. Anne?
So I too enjoyed the ward visits, and I do think we were, as James was saying, we were sort of building on each other's points. I suppose there was a time at which I wondered as if we were going to slightly undermine the difficult decisions the executive had made. I'm thinking like bank rates. You know, we made some really hard decisions, actually, to pay people for the work that we've employed them to do. And by appearing to be overly sympathetic to staff who don't like it, there is a risk that we actually send the wrong message. And I just think we need to think about our responsibilities to back up those hard decisions, was my thought.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Anne, but certainly I felt I tried to offer commentary about finance, and that we'd had a conversation in my visit where I'd been very specific in explaining the financial reality. But I think your point is really well made. We do not, whilst we all enjoy the visits, we don't want the executive to feel that it's a place where the difficult things they're doing are undermined. But at the same point I hold in my head, there's these endless contradictions, aren't there, that we have to give an honest picture, and it shouldn't all be, oh, it's wonderful, you know, it was a lovely visit and everyone's happy, if we're actually hearing negatives. Because one of the lessons for me about that comes from maternity is the importance of hearing discordant voices that might appear initially to be discordant, because we have to be able to hear those and work out what's really telling us something that we need to hear. And I think that's really, really tricky. Derek, final word.
Two final words for me. IQPI, that is really difficult, because I confess I came at it as fresh, but I have seen it before, and maybe I should think about that harder before I make my comments. But you see new things when you come at it afresh. I reread it from beginning to end. But the thing I really wanted to say was something that Thurza said, which I thought was one of those little phrases that really stuck in my mind. Maybe it's second nature to everyone else, but this thing about impact versus performance. And I thought that really made me think when you said that. And I thought it was a really apposite statement that we need to be looking. I think we need to be focusing on our impact. And we've got a lot of data about performance, and we've got quite a lot of data about impact. But I just wanted to thank Thurza for making that comment.
Can I endorse that? I thought it was very well made as well. Right, we've come to an end of that session. We've got the patient staff story next, but they're not here, and I wanted to, they are here, but I've still got something important to say before they start. And that this is Stephen Collier's last public board meeting. He's going to hate me for this because he didn't want me to do it. But I couldn't possibly let a public meeting pass without acknowledging the board's thanks, Stephen, to all that you've done over a long period of years. You and I and Anne joined the board together when George's was a very, very different place. And I want to put on record that you have been an important part of the improvement journey. You've been a great friend to a great many people, and one of your great skills is quietly putting a figure, perhaps not necessarily an arm round, but made people feel that you've put an arm around their shoulders and supported them. You've brought great insights to many of our discussions, and I know I speak for the whole board when I say we will miss you immensely, and we wish you the very best, and I feel really sorry that this day has come, but we know that board succession and refreshing is really important, and we understand all of that, but it doesn't in any way diminish the sense of loss that I have, and I know colleagues share, that you will be retiring from the board. Thank you for everything that you've done. You're allowed to say something.
Well, there are three thoughts in my head. In fact, I've written a speech. No, I haven't. So I think three thoughts. Firstly, thank you. Thank you for having me along. Thank you to you and your predecessors. I've really enjoyed it. I hope that's been clear. I've learned a lot, and I hope I've contributed. that was my first thought. My second thought really amplifies what Gillian has said. You know, when we came in, we were headed into quality special measures, financial special measures, and if you look at us now, you just put to one side and perhaps dial down the noise on a couple of the challenges we face. We're an integrated, multi-site, multi-trust group, going from strength to strength with a bright future. And my third thought was that when I put my application in to be a non-executive director, I laid out all of the challenges that face the trust. And at the end I wrote, it would be a great personal privilege to be part of this. And it has been. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So we move on to our patient staff story, but I'm not sure where our staff are who are going to talk to us about it. Are they there? Got a splitting headache. I'm taking so many other things I wouldn't want to take any. What are we going to do if they don't turn up? I wonder if I should do quick. The trouble is after we've closed. Can we come back to attention, please? Welcome. Oh, we've got quite a few of you. Can you sit down, make yourselves comfortable, and perhaps introduce yourselves?
Yes, certainly.
Can I just give you a microphone? That's okay.
Yeah, the sound. If we don't have mics, sorry, if you can bear it. It's difficult for me to hear, but the recording doesn't work without them. All right, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Lucy Botting. I'm Director of Sutton Health and Care.
I'm Sian Owen. I'm a speech and language therapist, paediatric speech and language therapist with Sutton Health and Care. And
I'm Beth Wilson. I'm the Head of Children's Services and the Deputy Director of Sutton Health and Care for Children. Nice to meet you all.
Well, lovely to meet you, and I know you're going to talk about a particular case because the parent wasn't able to be here, as I understand it, and they want it to be anonymised. Am I right? Yeah? Good. So who's going to lead?
I'm going to just start off for 1 minute, and it's just to put stuff in context for the board. And I suppose it's in relation to children's services. So Sutton Health and Care, just for the board, is a provider alliance. So it's a partnership organisation with services from Epsom St Helier and London Borough of Sutton. And I think that's important as we work through the board as the child story, child and family story. Children's Services particularly is overseen by myself as a joint appointment between LBS and Epsom St Helier, and with Beth Wilson, who is the Deputy Director of Children's Services, and hosts services within this portfolio for safeguarding, health visiting, school nursing that are employed by LBS, and children's therapy and special school nursing. So in the context of the story comes from obviously the Epsom St Helier Children's Therapy team, but the reflections on the story come from the whole as part of that child service. Thank you.
That's very helpful context. Thank you.
So the family that I'm going to talk about, I did speak to them. They couldn't come because of work commitments, so I've had a recent chat with them. The child is on my caseload, so I'm very familiar with the case. She's 6 now, but concerns started around 2 years old. The family were worried about her talking, her attention, and her social interaction. They asked the GP for a community paediatrician referral and a referral to SALT. There was a little bit of a mix-up for the family, and their referral to SALT went to Merton, but then it came back to us quite quickly in Sutton. At 2.5, she was referred to us. We saw her quite quickly. At that time, we had almost no waiting time, so she got the referral. She came straight in. The speech and language therapist that saw her felt that there were concerns around her interaction skills particularly and her attention. She wasn't understanding following instructions very well. She wasn't talking all the things that the parents were worried about. There was agreement between them, and so they felt that they were in the right place. We sent them to a group, and they had a group that we call Social Butterflies, which is for small children that need help with their attention, their social communication. They did that the month after referral. That all went quite well. At the same time, the referral that the GP had made to the community paediatricians was declined. We carried on seeing her. We have a review, come back, work on targets at home kind of procedure going on. There was progress being made. She was talking more. The family were hoping that this would increase and move on. Referral to community paediatrician was discussed again, but it was felt that because she was making quite good progress, although the family were worried, we'd try the language groups, which she did, hoping that that would make further improvement. In February 2020, we saw her for the last time for a review face-to-face. Our service then got closed down for COVID, and we didn't see the children for 8 months. So they came back to us in 8 months. The parents have obviously been at home on their own, worried, but they did feel that the extra time one-to-one and without the school situation had made some progress for her. They were feeling quite, positive. We saw her for a review in November 2020, which was the first time after the 8 months. Then in May, at the November appointment, nobody brought up community paediatrician referral. At the May appointment, Mum asked if she could be referred to the community paediatricians, but at that point the therapist had to say she's too old because the community paediatricians have a cut-off age. Mum wasn't very happy about this. She feels now, the conversation I had with her last week was, she feels that was a big mistake, that her child has lost time due to the diagnosis process being delayed. They had to go down a different route through Cognis, which is a different organisation, and the wait times there were very long. She also began to feel that they weren't getting enough support for the child. So after another few reviews, the speech and language therapist that was working with her decided to consult with a more senior member of the team that works more with developmental language disorders, also the team leader, that would be me, for a second opinion. I did that, agreed that the child needed to come over to our part of the service, which is a more specialist level, so we can offer more sort of intervention, more frequent intervention and liaison with school. We did a joint occupational therapy appointment because of the sensory needs of the child, which made a big difference. Mum started to feel that things were going in the right direction now, that she was getting the support she needed, but she was sorry that it hadn't come a lot sooner, that she would have liked to have had that level of input sooner. She's now with me. I see her monthly, but our service only extends to the end of year 3, so the year a child turns 8, which is the age the child is. So we are on our last year where we can support her. So I'm starting to talk to Mum about what happens next and make sure that that is all clear with her. And I think that's probably it. They're quite happy with the service now. They've filled in some friends and feedback forms, and they're feeling things are going in the right direction. That's it.
Thank you. You're going to talk about learning.
Yeah, so for us, obviously, COVID interrupted what our normal process would be. But I think from a learning perspective, I think we have already implemented some things, which is transition plans for children who are moving into a different service. So for Cognis, for example, we have a team email for any therapist who's a link to, every school has a link with that service. So we make sure that the handover goes to school, but also that therapist, so that the plan can continue very streamlined. There's no interruption. No falling through the net. Equally also is the fact that we need to be very transparent, even though there is progress within the specific areas around speech and language, where there might be concerns. We need to have that courage to have those difficult conversations with parents, that actually what we're seeing is maybe not typical of the development. So whilst the speech is improving, there may be some other concerns that we have that we think we should be doing more about. It was out of our control in terms of the paediatricians turning down the referral from the GP and then the occupational therapy. But equally, there is possibly work to be done with our colleagues in the paediatric triaging. And are we not putting down the information they need in order to meet the threshold for their service? So there was a lot of things that we looked at personally from what the parents said and what their experience was. There was some really good practice and some really good things. COVID got in our way, but equally there's some learning to do in terms of making sure that transitions, age limits in terms of that parents are aware of where that stops for paediatric review. So a lot of work around communication for the more junior members of the speech and language and therapy team around having those courageous conversations where there might be something they need to talk to the parents about. It's difficult because we might need to just do that over a period of time and kind of plant the seeds, but to be brave and have those conversations. So that's where we're at the moment. We're really open to anything else you think we might have missed, though, because there's always something.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for coming and talking to us and being so open about it. Colleagues, question? Oh, I've seen lots and lots of hands. So I'm going to start with Chris, then Jenny, then James, then Kate, and then Yin. So I think it's probably best if we get all the questions. Otherwise, what happens is it goes on forever and it's very hard for you. So, Chris.
Thank you. So 2 questions. One is, on reflection, do you think that there would have been any benefit to a community paediatrician referral, and if so, what was it that went missing? And secondly, you described some cut-off points at which people have to transition. Are those hard and fast, or is it just that that's what the system has created and that's what you have to work to? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Jenny.
Overlap a little bit with Chris's. Has the child remediated, or will there be permanent deficit from the delays?
Thank you. James.
I think my question was broadly the same. So do we, has the child, in your view, not accessed a service that they should have accessed because they didn't access a community paediatrician and therefore presumably a potential diagnosis? And given if they're now over the age for accessing the community paediatric pathway, have they been referred into a different, for example, a CAMS diagnostic pathway, so that can potentially be addressed? And also, sorry, just building on that as well, is there do you feel that any educational support was not provided or was delayed in being provided because of the lack of a diagnosis?
There's a lot here, so I hope you're keeping track of them. Don't worry, I'm keeping track of them as well. Kate.
Hopefully I'll make it easier because my question was the same as Chris's. But my second point was a comment really, and I know you've reflected a little bit on this of how very stressful transition is, isn't it, for parents of children, whether that be at 8, whether it be at 16, whether it be at 18, and I guess we need to think about all we can do to reduce that stress of transfer. But
thank you, Kate. Yin.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the initial referral. You said that was declined. Did you get good reasons as to why it was declined, and would you be able to build on that for sort of future references, please?
Okay, so are you good to go?
I'm good to go, yes. Go for it. You might have to remind me of all of that. So the first one was about community paediatricians. And sorry, my processing myself is not so good. Cut-off points. So the cut-off points in the service are the service that we're, what's it called? The provision. Yeah. It's not commissioned anymore, is it? So it's arbitrary, but it's been decided, it's been like that. I've worked for 26 years and it's always been those kind of age cut-offs. So they still can get speech and language therapy. They move over to a different, so if it becomes an educational issue then, and so the schools have to pay for it with the budget that they get. So my recommendations would be that ongoing support is required, and then it goes over to education because it's an education need, not a health need. at that point in time. So it's not that they're like, goodbye forever. They're not left stranded. Community paediatricians, what was the question about the community paediatricians?
On reflection, what benefit would there have been from that community paediatrician referral?
Yeah, there are benefits in that if you've got the diagnosis, some pathways, some placements open up to a child. On the other hand, we would treat and deliver therapy on what we are seeing in front of us. Our service would not, it made no difference to her access to our service. She got what we needed to give her along the way. So from that point of view, no. But from the point of view of education and things like that, yes, it can make a difference for that. Is that okay?
Jenny's about permanent deficit, which you've kind of just...
Yeah.
The implication of what you've just said is that possibly, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No. For her, I mean, she has now, to answer your question in advance, she was referred to the CAMS pathway and got diagnosed in May after about a year waiting there with not ADHD, autism and pathological demand avoidance. So she got the diagnosis through the CAMS pathway. Those are neurodivergent conditions that are part of her. She's not getting worse. She's not, she's always going to be slightly less typical in her development. I don't think that there are any deficits. She's not getting better because that's who she is, but she is improving on her ways of being able to engage with the world and communicate what she wants rather than a lot of the behavioural difficulties that she was demonstrating when she was younger. And that also comes with age as well. She is growing up. So I don't think the community paediatrician delay has harmed her. I think it stressed the parents out quite a lot. They didn't know what was wrong. They were asking lots of questions like that. Why? What's going to happen? But we had a lot of conversations around, even if we did know that, it's not going to change what I do with her. She's still going to move like this. We're still going to do that kind of thing.
Some of these are melding into each other, aren't they? So James's point is, should she have accessed a different route? Yeah. I suppose what you've said that makes me feel uneasy about all of this is you use the word the cut-offs are arbitrary, and I kind of understand that there's got to be rules and things, but arbitrary always makes me feel really nervous.
I think we would agree with you in terms of that comes from what is commissioned by the Integrated Care Board and what is considered the NHS service provision under 5. And then when they're in education, it passes to Cognos. What we're trying to do, and I think you're right in terms of the transition points, it's really worrying that we might drop something. So that's really important for us to be able to deal with.
I think the other issue is very familiar to me because my background is local authorities, is that constant tension between funding, between health and education.
I've just come from a transformation role at the ICB for children, and I absolutely echo the fact that actually there's a difficulty in the fact that none of us have enough resource, and so there is a bit of a tug of war where should actually be splitting it 3 ways sometimes and just agreeing that the need is there. It is split health, education and social care, and we should just be agreeing it very easily and very quickly. However, I didn't manage to do that with my absent magic wand when I was there, so we'll keep trying.
Indeed. James, did you want to come in specifically on this?
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of a few comments, partly as ESTH Managing Director, partly as the place lead for the ICB for Sutton, who's very conscious, and Beth, you used to work in the team, and we're very happy to see you kind of move on to this role because we know that it's part of your progression in terms of helping us transform the system, but also partly as the parent of a child with a neurodevelopmental diagnosis. I mean, I think that the challenge for us, and it's sort of partly to test this, is what education and local authority partners consistently say to us is that the diagnosis should not be necessary as a gateway to the right educational support. But so I'm quite keen to sort of get your reflections on whether some of the settings that were difficult to access were actually educational settings, where actually the underlying assessment of the child's functional and support needs should have driven whether the child was able to access that setting, not whether they had the diagnosis or not. I think my reflection as a parent, and we've just been talking about the community peds waiting list in the main part of the meeting, and I'm always quite careful to try and keep my personal and professional hats on differently, but I am very influenced by it with this one. Is that I think the lived experience as a parent is that the diagnosis does really matter, and accessing support is easier post-diagnosis. So I just wanted to sort of reflect that I know that there is a stated pathway that says we take the needs of the child, and that's what we base our assessment on, and that's what we base provision on, and that should be the same in health and education. But the experience as a parent is diagnosis is really important, and in the context of the rise in the presentation of neurodevelopmental conditions that we're seeing, I think it does raise fundamental questions for us as a health and care system, but also as a society, in terms of how we're going to sort of gear ourselves up for that, because I feel that we're geared up for the level of presentation we had 15 or 20 years ago, and we know there are deficits in the community paediatric workforce, we know there are deficits in the paediatric therapy workforce as well. So I think the point about, can we access the educational support irrespective of diagnosis is an interesting one to get your views on, but more generally I would like to say I think it's recognised widely across the system that we have got a lot further to go in terms of support for this group of children.
I totally agree with you, and I think the thing that we're looking at doing is strengthening the kind of universal offer, so identifying issues earlier. So one of the pieces of work we're doing is getting school nurses to go in between the 2-year and 5-year gap where health visitor mandated contacts are, and linking with nurseries and preschools and other settings to identify emerging needs earlier so that the pathways are clearer, and also looking at, can we use different alternatives to paediatricians for referral processes? So could we look at specialist neurodevelopmental nurses? Could we include a child psychologist in our kind of multi-agency assessment of that young person or child? And I think you're absolutely right. Parents do need a diagnosis for the EHCP provision, for example, but we want them to have that offer without that. So if we can get it right earlier, we may take away the need for the diagnosis in order for them to get the right provision. So that would be my dream before I retire. Watch this space.
This is a really complex subject. We're not going to be able to do justice to it in a board story, but I'm really grateful to you for bringing it to us, because it does enable us to understand just some of the difficulties that parents and children are experiencing. Because as James said, we look at the numbers and we're not happy with them, but what we're talking about is how somebody's lives are being really impacted. Kate made the point about a transition that adds to that, and you may well want to say something about that. And then Yin made the point about the initial referral being declined.
So the GP made the initial referral, so I'll come to that first. So it would be interesting to look at what was included in that and why, the reasons for declining. So we can definitely go back and look at that. We need to get better at making sure that the referrals hold the right information, and I sometimes think paediatricians get a one-liner, which is not always helpful. That's the same with therapists, just so you're aware. But GPs are under stress as well and very busy, so I get it. We just need to get better at it. In terms of the transition, we've got a kind of a model of preparing for adulthood and transition points from preschool to school to primary to secondary. So we're looking at how we can make sure the communication pathways are really good, and that the lead person for that child, around the child and family, is the one that makes sure that there is handover of that information to the right people at the right time. And we're starting it much earlier, because I think we're too late to the party, especially we should be starting around 14 for our teenagers instead of 16, and we should be starting at 3, 4 instead of at 5 for school entry. So we're aware of our resources not being great, so we should use our resources creatively earlier on rather than being reactive afterwards. But it's a work in progress.
Yeah, some really complex issues, and I'm really grateful to you for illustrating, as I say, the kind of reality behind the numbers. You kind of have this sense as a board that this isn't good enough, but this translates into people's lives, and the point that Jenny raised about permanent deficits. And I think you've given us a degree of comfort around that, and you're obviously all working really hard to address these issues, but they're not easy or straightforward, are they? And we haven't sorted out the funding. The tug of war will continue because there's not enough money in the system for this client group. I think we probably have to stop there because we've still got another part to the meeting and a long way to go. But thank you very much again. I hope that you found it useful to you, and it's not just been a chore, but enabling us to understand these things better. And I hope that the family will take some comfort from the fact that we've listened really carefully and better understand the issues and try and do our best. I think it's a system issue, isn't it? But we have to play our part in that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Right, we've got some questions that we need to deal with now. We have some written questions from members of the public, and they're all going to be answered by Andrew Asprey. But Andrew, could you explain the question and then give the answer? And then we will see if the governors in the room have any questions they want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. The first question was around the progress broadly of SETCH and the new hospitals programme. Question about have we applied for planning permission yet and when works will start, things like that. We have not applied for planning permission yet. We are working very closely with NHP on their Hospital 2.0 design guidelines. When we've been able to integrate those into our design, we'll then be able to apply for planning. However, we have received from NHP additional funding for some of the enabling works, things like road improvements and site clearances. So we may well go and do some smaller planning applications to get those enabling works started in the next 12 months or so. There's a question about maintenance and the percentage of maintenance that's been cleared and that's remaining. We've just commissioned across the group a new 6-facet survey because it has been some time across the group since we've had them done. So I think it might be best to look at that again when the results come in of that 6-facet survey. We have articulated how much we've been spending on all sites against backlog, but we'll begin to see some results from those surveys coming out in the next 3 to 6 months. And then the final question, the hot topic of RAC. We are not aware, and we have had surveys done across all the sites. We're not aware of any RAC that has been used across any of our hospital sites. We will reconfirm that during this new 6-facet survey that's commenced, just to make doubly sure.
Thank you, Andrew. I think there is an important assurance piece around RAC that we need to pay attention to as a board. There is another element to the public question, actually, which is about virtual wards. Thursa, has anyone told you that? Are you ready to answer it?
Now being told what my answer is, had answered it, yes. So we were asked how many virtual ward beds had been commissioned across our area. It's actually 250 beds, so that covers Surrey Downs, Sutton, Merton and Wandsworth.
Thank you very much indeed, Thursa and Andrew. So any questions from Georgia's governors? Richard, and then...
Can I just say thanks to Thursa? I went to, with colleagues, to the NHS Providers Annual National Governors Focus Conference and met someone from Sherwood Forest NHS Foundation Trust. And they were discussing virtual wards. I'd just been to a presentation, heard a presentation at the previous board meeting. Thursa was very helpful in providing some information which I was able to provide to my government colleague, if you like, and he was very My question is, there was discussion about the value of the board visits. My question is, there's a wealth of information that is obviously provided. How does that get followed up? Because some of it is soft information, some of it are very detailed questions, some are answered in the meeting itself, some raise questions, which I don't know if they're tracked and then, if you like, followed up on. And I'd just like to know how that is done in general.
Thank you. Stephen, would you deal with that?
Yeah, so we pick up the actions that come out of these and do follow up on them. We need to get back into a bit of a rhythm about sort of playing that back here, not as part of necessarily the public papers to discuss, but to just relay that so that it's clear what's going on. But I think it relates to a broader point, which I think we're going to pick up our next development session around, the visiting of board members across, and how does that wealth of information get sort of fed back and triangulated. So there is something specific that's in place around the pre-board visits, and there's something slightly broader as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Everyone?
Mine was on the tail of Ian's point earlier about speaking up among some groups of staff in our organisation.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'll speak more loudly. I was referring to Ian's earlier question about speaking up. And
that would be helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Where do I press it? Yeah. Ian's point about speaking up, and it was sort of related also to Richard's description of safety being a way that we practice foresight, and I was wondering how we help our staff to become more articulate in identifying the vulnerabilities in their work environments. And I guess this is part of being able to speak up in a confident way and to have the tools to do that and the vocabulary to do that. And so the question is, what are we doing with the new safety piece of framework to disseminate that framework and give our staff the tools to be a bit more articulate in describing those vulnerabilities? So what's our plan to do that?
Arlene, do you want to deal with the PSERF point about how we're ensuring people understand it? I think even if people understand it, it's a much broader question. I'm not sure we can do it justice in a simple answer, but it's much broader about how people feel safe and confident to speak up. But would you deal perhaps with the PSERF point, Arlene?
Yeah, so with the PSERF, I mean, there is a lot of training that is happening, and there's just general training just for introduction so that people understand, but there's specific training for individuals who will undertake investigations or review processes to help them to understand. And our team here, so the simulation team at Epsom St Helier, have actually been commissioned by South West London to deliver that training, not just for Epsom St Helier, but across South West London. And that simulation team do a lot of focus on the psychological safety elements of it and how we work, how teams work together to gain a more comprehensive understanding of what we need to do to make the improvements. So it's not a blame game. The training is happening, but I think the real meat in it will be when we start applying that and being able to demonstrate the learning that is coming from it, having looked at incidents in a very different way.
Thank you, Arlene. I've got Richard and Stephen want to add to this. Richard.
I completely agree with what Arlene's just said, but I also think it's important for us to remember that we shouldn't frame our wish for staff to be able to speak up simply through PSERF, because with the best will in the world, a lot of our staff will just see that as another NHS initiative at a busy time. And I think we need to be able to articulate it in really plain, straightforward English again and again and again, how much we want to hear their views. I think part of the learning from the St George's maternity CQC inspection was that part of the problem was not that our staff didn't know how to articulate concerns, but that they didn't get through in the right way and we didn't pick them up and we didn't respond in the right way. So the two main things that stop people from raising concerns are the belief that nothing will be done about them and the fear of suffering reprisals. And I think we have to keep saying and demonstrating that we will hear, that we do something, and people will not suffer reprisals. And it's hard work, and it will take a long time for people to believe us.
Thank you, Richard. Final word, Stephen.
Richard's covered some of the points I was going to make. I mean, just on the point around training and how do you, not so much on the technical aspects of I think you put it as technical vulnerabilities, but just generally, how do we train? So I guess it's through Freedom to Speak Up, there are a few vehicles that help. It's not the sum totality, but it's part of it. So the 2 Freedom to Speak Up teams do go into boards, departments across both trusts to speak with staff informally, to give them the opportunity to raise bilaterally sort of opportunities to raise concerns with them. And that's the sort of rolling programme. There are a set of workshops that happen on a regular basis to sort of talk to staff about how they can raise concerns, the kinds of concerns that can be raised, where to raise them. I think one of the things we did at George's about 18 months ago was to bring raising concerns training into the MAST training programme. And one of the interesting things there is that we went from about 200 or 300 staff that had undergone some training in Freedom to Speak Up in a structured way to now pushing 5,000 staff having done some training. Now, MAST training is not the silver bullet to this, but it does help, and it does sort of reinforce staff how they can do that. And I'd absolutely follow up on Richard's point. When you look at the National Guardian for Freedom to Speak Up, there are sort of 3 components to it. One is the speak up, one is the listen up, one is the follow up. And I think on maternity, the speak up did work. Staff weren't afraid to speak up in that case. They didn't not know how to raise the concerns or who to raise them to. I think the challenges for us are, did we listen sufficiently in the right way, and did we follow up in the right way? And those are the bits in that case where we haven't. But we know there are staff groups that we have fewer concerns raised from, and so that's another piece we've got to dig under to understand what's the barrier to them speaking up. And some of the things we'll discuss in the second part of the meeting, we'll get into sort of how we begin to unpick some of that.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really helpful. We've had a really, really long day, and I do think we need to break now, and we need a proper break. You may not, but I do. I was in hospital earlier this week, and I've just about had enough now. I need a proper break. So I'm going to restart the private board at 2:00, and then I hope that we can all get through the material we need to get through, but we can be brisk in how we do that, so that we don't find ourselves here when it's really time to be going home. So thank you very much, everybody. I think we've had some really important discussions. I'm grateful to the way everybody's been thoughtful and done their best to cover the material that needed to be covered, but be brisk at the same time. I know it's a difficult balance to get right. So we're back on at 2:00. Okay, thank you.
Stevie.